SaveWithConrad.com.
My name is Catherine West from Visalia, California. And for many years, my husband has listened to the podcasts. And so every time I am stressed about anything, he has said, well, we need to call Save with Conrad. We ended up in a situation where we thought this would be helpful for us. So we were struggling with some credit card debt that we had. We knew that we had some equity in our house that we could possibly access to get some cash out and refinance, consolidate some of those things. And so we were able to do that with this latest refinance that we did. It saves us so much on interest and really helps us out financially. Plus, we have a little left over to be able to do a few things around the house that we wanted to. And the money that we were paying into those things, we can hopefully start saving now. In that alone, we'll save $1,400 a month. And it didn't change our house payment, maybe even like $50 less. I feel like we're far away in terms of like the United States, but I don't feel that far away from you guys. I always feel like you're a phone call away, you're an email away, and always like available to me. Diane Raver is who we worked with. And every time I needed her, I was able to reach out and contact her, and she was always getting right back to me. I felt heard. I called with real concerns, and I really just needed some help and to figure out how to make this work. I never felt like I was getting this because you just wanted business. Like, I felt like you genuinely care about what I need, and you heard what I needed, and then you found a way to make that happen. And so I recommend you guys wholeheartedly. I feel like you'll be honest and helpful. And feeling heard is just what every person wants to have done when it's in a situation like this. My name is Catherine West, and I saved over $1,400 a month with SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender. SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. John, what's going on?
Yes, I'm back. I'm still pinch hitting for Brother Love. I haven't killed your podcast yet. I haven't killed the audience yet, I don't think. But so far, I'm still the pinch hitter for Brother Love.
And we are glad that you're a pinch hitter for Brother Love. I can confirm I have spoken with Brother Love. And what I did not realize is, in the month of March, how much the WWE is zigzagging? Have you seen this? I mean, they're going across the globe from Barcelona and back.
Wow. You think that the travel has gotten better, but it's still, they're doing a ton of freaking travel. It's unbelievable. Back in the day, we would run one coast to the other back to back. It's like a cross-eyed guy had the freaking Rand McNally map and we're just throwing darts at it.
I mean, serious business. They're going to do a Friday night SmackDown in Barcelona, Spain on March 14th. And the next day they're in Germany. And the 16th back in Germany. The 17th, Raw in Belgium. On the 21st, they're doing SmackDown in Italy. And then they're going to Ireland. And then back to England. And then a Raw in Scotland. And then a SmackDown in London. And then they're headed to Austria. And then the Netherlands. I mean, it's pretty crazy the schedule they're going to be on this year. And we haven't really spent any time talking about it, John, but WrestleMania this year is going to be Easter weekend in Las Vegas. And I guess, according to the rumor and innuendo, that's not a big weekend historically for Vegas, Easter weekend. That makes sense. So supposedly it was part of the package that WWE received. Hey, if you'll come, help support us on a down weekend, we can kick in some more incentives. And well, here it comes. We're getting WrestleMania on Easter weekend in Las Vegas. It's much later than we normally see WrestleMania. Is that going to feel a little weird to you, John?
Yeah, it will feel weird. But just because it's later than normal, it's just, you got that, clock, that annual clock that WrestleMania usually happens around the 1st of April, end of March, it just kind of feels a little different. It's the middle of April, but that's just from an old guy that's used to it being done a certain way. Obviously they're breaking the molds completely. And what's changed so much, which is awesome, is I don't know the economic metrics of anything they're doing in Vegas, but they're getting site fees now to come in. I mean, it's not just a matter of they're getting a deal on the arena. They're getting paid about a lot of these different cities and arenas to come in and do stuff like this. It's an amazing change of economics, what's going on in WWE.
Well, let's talk about some of the economics of what's happening in WWE with, the incredible welcome, another sold-out house, another hugely financially successful show for Raw on Netflix. But episode 2 saw the debut. Michael Cole called it the worst kept secret in the business. We're talking about Penta on Raw, the former Pentagon that we've seen in Mexico and certainly in TNA and even AEW, is now a part of the WWE roster. And boy, did he get a hero's welcome. An incredible performance against Chad Gable, and maybe even more compelling was an in-ring promo after. It felt like a big deal. He did the promo in English and in Spanish. We saw his family in the front row crying. I mean, they rolled out the red carpet, and I couldn't help but notice Michael Cole say on the pinfall, "Welcome to the big time, Penta." What'd you think of that debut and the first time we see Penta in WWE?
They do debuts better than anybody else. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. And to put him out there with Chad Gable, Gable is God's gift to wrestling, man. I mean, he's like just a modern day Kurt Angle. He can do absolutely anything. He is so freaking talented and so good at what he does. He's a lot like Kurt as far as what he does with his microphone skills, what he does in the ring. As he does, he can do comedy. He does serious stuff. He can be a great wrestler. I mean, that's the right guy. And that's so important to put Penta out there with somebody like Chad Gable. Now, Penta obviously is a huge star. He's going to be a star no matter what. But you give him a guy like Chad Gable, and Gable helps make him. I thought the debut was absolutely fantastic. It's going to really help. You know, I was just down in South Texas recently, and I think we've underestimated the amount of Latinos in our country. And for a lot of reasons, the censuses, just they're not done like you need in the modern day. It's like modern day polls for political opponents. Who answers the phone? Nobody that I know of. And so this is huge, I think, for WWE, especially with the Latino population, with guys. And I say with Latino population, he's like Rey Mysterio. Or you say Rey Mysterio is one of the greatest luchas of all time. Rey Mysterio is like one of the greatest of all time, period. This has nothing to do with any type of demographic, but it does help. When you want to run Mexico or you want to run Southwest United States, to have a great Latino star, and he is absolutely fantastic.
We got to talk about what's next for Penta in the coming weeks, but I also want to hear from you about Corey Graves. I don't know if you saw this, but he put up a tweet that's got everybody hot and bothered. He wrote, "Imagine chasing your dream, then being told, not deciding, that you're no longer physically able to pursue your dream. And then you dedicate your life to something dream adjacent and being pretty fucking awesome at it. And then when it's time to enjoy the fruits of your labor," of course, the idea here is he's being told, well, here it is. "And then it's time to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You're being told you're not famous enough for your own job." Just in case you've wondered where I've been. So people are hanging on that. When it's time to enjoy the fruits of your labor, you're being told you're not famous enough for your own job. Of course, the inference here is that he's taken issue with Pat McAfee seemingly sitting in his spot. Through the years, John, we've seen a 2-man desk. We've seen a 3-man desk. Hell, once upon a time, we saw a 4-man desk on Monday Night Raw. We've also seen Corey Graves go from being, an up-and-coming superstar we thought was going to be the next big thing in NXT to becoming the voice of Raw and then the voice of SmackDown. So at the time, that was the number 1 show in the world and the number 2 show in the world, and he was the voice on both of them. That's a pretty big deal. Not a lot of people have done that. Pretty rarefied air gig. But now with WWE under new leadership, we see Joe Tessitore on one show, we see Pat McAfee on the other, and it feels like Corey's on the outside looking in. Jonathan Coachman was very quick to say something along the lines of, "Hey man, this happened to JR 5 times. Enjoy your 5 months a year or your break or whatever it is until Pat McAfee is back doing game day." JR didn't have very much sympathy either. I do. I kind of I'm on Team Corey here, and I hope in a weird way, maybe it didn't start this way. I hope it does result in him not getting the dream adjacent, but the dream. I think the internet now has an appetite, John, maybe accidentally, to see Pat McAfee and Corey Graves. What do you make of all this?
I can understand. There's only 3 commentary spots, unless you have 2 color commentators on a certain show like we've had before with a 3-man booth. There's only 3 color commentator spots, and so you got to move guys around, and that happens. And I can certainly understand Corey's angst in this. I don't know. Only what was read, and certainly text does not denote tone. So you don't know what tone this was written in. I think Corey's done an incredible job. I think Corey is an incredible commentator. I think Pat McAfee is too. I think, look, Pat adds so much to WWE. It's wonderful that he comes in, and it's wonderful he has this huge following, and he does such an incredible job. They're completely different. And to me, I think there's room for both. And I certainly hope they find room for both.
What's your preference? 2-man booth, 3-man booth, 4-man booth? What do you prefer?
2-man. 3-man sucks. I hated it. I thought it was just awful. You had to get everybody in. And the hard problem with a 2-man booth is you've got to have the play-by-play guy be part babyface, so you can't have a guy call it right down the middle. So I understand the dynamics of a 3-man booth, because the play-by-play guy can then call it right down the middle, and you can have your heel and your babyface color commentators. Without that, generally the color commentator is a heel, and so you need a babyface play-by-play guy, which kind of takes away a little bit from the play-by-play guy. Most guys, though, can walk that line, but I prefer a 2-man booth. It is so much easier. 4-man booth was horrible. We had a 4-man booth for a while, and that was just awful. It's like like you see on CNN sometimes when you have like 18 people in the Brady Bunch boxes, and you're like, this is the worst show ever. There's no way anything gets done.
I like this type of news, because we all have our opinions about, I think Corey should be there. I understand why they're using Pat, or why can't they just do a 3-man booth? But the idea that anytime there's any sort of speculation about someone being unhappy, that we fans immediately say, oh, what if they're working an angle? Like, even when something is real, we want it to be part of the story. And when something's part of the story, we want it to be real. Isn't that what's great about wrestling?
It's awesome about wrestling. You have no idea what's real and what isn't. It's like Houdini in the milk can. You know that there's a trick, but you also know that there's danger, or you think there's danger. You don't know how much danger. And is there a chance he's drowning? You have no idea. The blurring that line to me is fantastic. And with Pat, this has gone on since the beginning of time. I mean, you had guys like Max Baer, Bronco Nagurski, Joe Louis, you name the star that came in. Gus Sonnenberg came in with a huge following from football and became this huge star in the late 20s during the Depression. Guys have come in that have this huge following, and people are going, wait a minute, what are they doing in our business? There's always a little bit of resentment there, but it's good for the business that you have something like this. So to me, I think it's great that Pat's there. I think it's great there's a little bit of controversy, and have some fun with it. I mean, these are two great commentators.
Yes.
And Pat has this huge following, which you can't replicate. Bringing something like that, here's a guy who sits there with Nick Saban and sits there on College Game Day, which is about my favorite show on the planet. And then he comes over to Monday Night Raw. That's huge. And Corey Graves is huge too. I don't think there's a lose with this. I think as long as both of them end up somewhere, I think it's a win for wrestling and for WWE.
It's so amazing to me, though, that Corey sends one tweet out and the internet immediately jumps on, oh, there's real heat. He's going to try to quit. He's going to NXT. Oh, no, he's going to be at WrestleMania against Pat McAfee. He's going to be back in the ring. Like, I love Corey Graves, and I love that this is a story. And I love
it. By the way, how much? What does this tell you about social media? This tells you that social media can run angles.
Yes.
If you run social media as part of your character, and whether it's legit or not, it makes no difference whatsoever. You can create huge buzz. It's when guys expose themselves on social media that they hurt themselves. Guys like this, things like this doesn't hurt anything. Things like this significantly help, but you can see how powerful social media can be if used correctly.
I wanted to ask you, too, about some other news that's come out in the last week or so. We found out the full schedule for Saturday night's main event, and it looks like they have intentionally and rather smartly decided to go head-to-head against AEW's Vegas pay-per-view. Well, that's historically where it is. It's Double or Nothing in Las Vegas. That's going to be in May, but the big one is in July. July 12th will be the biggest AEW show ever in America. It's a stadium show, Globe Layfield in the suburbs of Dallas, right there in Arlington. And now it's been revealed WWE is going to be live for free, not on pay-per-view, on NBC and Peacock for a Saturday night's main event. When I saw this, I just had a chuckle and said, man, it's Jim Crockett Promotions. WWE.
Yes, it is.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it is. This is the greatest ever. I got to hear Vince one time explain the Thanksgiving Day pay-per-view, and it was so freaking good to hear him finally say it. Now, he said it behind closed doors, and now he said it since, so I'm not giving out anything that people don't know. But he was talking about how when Crockett was going to run the pay-per-view on Thanksgiving Day, it was either Starcade or Starcade. And Vince also came along. He said, all of a sudden, we decided to do a pay-per-view on that same day and mentioned to the pay-per-view providers that if they carried Crockett, they don't carry WrestleMania. You know, it's just funny how that happens, or funny how that happens that all of a sudden we run a show and Jim Crockett would run a free show opposite. I mean, this has gone on since the beginning of time. You would see it in arenas and territories. You know, guys would come in to run, like WWE would come in to run, and Bill Watts would run a free show in the same town with Dr. Death and all those big stars. Not a free show, but a cheap show, some type of show that would try to hurt WWE. This has gone on since the beginning of time. This is just old promoter banter back and forth. I love it. I think it's wonderful. This is great for wrestling fans.
Agree.
I mean, thank goodness we have any kind of competition. Who cares what it is? I think it's just great for wrestling fans. And this tour overseas, all this happens because of Netflix.
Yes.
We couldn't do any of that. You know, when we did Raw once a month and we did 4 tapings in one night, we would go on international tours. We'd spend 23, 24 days in South Africa. We'd spend it in Europe. You couldn't do that once you went to Raw every single week. You would try to go somewhere, but you had to be back the next Monday. Well, now, because of ratings and things like that and pay-per-views, well, now, because it's all on streaming, you can do it anywhere in the world. You can do pay-per-views anywhere in the world. You can do Raw and SmackDown anywhere in the world. It's changed the wrestling dynamic completely. It is incredible, I think, what we're going to see in the next few years from WWE.
I can't wait to see how the company just evolves and grows with all these international Raws now that Netflix is a thing. But I'm pretty excited to see what happens with these head-to-head AEW, WWE moments. Dave Meltzer's on record as saying Tony ought to consider moving the AEW pay-per-view to Sunday. Of course, there couldn't be a Saturday night's main event on a Sunday. I mean, maybe there could, but that would be tough to market that way. But Meltzer even suggests that if he leaves it on Saturday, he could cost AEW 30,000 buys. Well, not he could, but WWE being head-to-head could potentially cost 30,000 buys. That felt like a huge number to me. What would you do? Would you keep it on Saturday and let's do battle head to head with Saturday night's main event? Or would you try to see if you could move it to Sunday, John?
I'd move it. This is not WCW. I mean, this is, you don't have Goldberg, you don't have Hogan, and no offense to those guys down there. You get some great stars. Kenny Omega, Moxley, Cope now, Edge, Adam Copeland. You got some great stars, but WWE is the machine. WWE is by far the 800-pound gorilla. It's not a equal competition because WWE is so much bigger, and I would move it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find a reason not to move it. I know you've already announced it, and I know you've sold 10-something thousand tickets, but it does feel like, you know, the avalanche of revenue is going to come in on international pay-per-view as well, and I might want to move it. So we'll see what happens. In the meantime, I do want to.
By the way, wait till you see how they load this show on Saturday Night Main Event.
Oh, it's going to be crazy.
They're going to load this show like it's a WrestleMania. I love this competition. This is one of the oldest things in the world in the wrestling business. You saw it back in the territory days. You saw it in the first TV days. You saw it in the first pay-per-view days. This is the oldest competition in the world, and they're going to load this Saturday Night Main Event like it's WrestleMania. This is going to be a hell of a show.
And that, by the way, is great news if you're a wrestler, if you're a wrestling fan, if you work in the industry. It is not great news maybe if you're one of the owners of these outfits, but everybody else participating. Competition is just good for everybody, and this is it, man. Exhibit A. Let's talk about some other competition, though, because all of a sudden it feels like AEW has some competition when it comes to touring, and that's thanks to your pals over at TNA, who, as folks are listening to this, last night was the big pay-per-view main event on Genesis. Joe Henry and Nick Nemeth. I heard all about it on Busted Open this past week. They're in Dallas, Texas, Genesis last night. Of course, you and I are recording in advance of that, but I think a lot of people have been missing out and maybe sleeping on TNA because it's quietly become one of the better shows in wrestling each week, right?
I was down in San Antonio, one of the first appearances I made at TNA, and the pay-per-view I saw down there, I told them that's one of the best pay-per-views I've seen in years. It was comparable to WWE to me as the gold standard, and it was comparable to WWE. I thought it was absolutely fantastic from top to bottom. I thought the work was fantastic. The wrestling was fantastic. The booking was fantastic. Everything about it. And the crowd, it's kind of like the old ECW. The crowds don't chant WWE. Crowds don't chant WCW. Crowds chant TNA. They have an ownership there. They chant NXT. They have an ownership there with the brand. And once you start getting that, you have this passion like you had with ECW. That's hard to replicate. That's almost incredible to build. They've done it, and they're selling out in almost every arena they've been going to. I mean, they're not huge arenas, but so what? You're selling out. I think it's fantastic what they're doing. I mean, they are hitting absolutely on all cylinders. And this Joe Henry, this kid is the real deal. I'm telling you, there's something special about him. I watched several of his matches live, and when you watch that crowd get into every single thing that he does, I mean, he is over. Absolutely over. And now you put him out there with the guy that one of the best wrestlers of all time in Nick Nemeth. I've never seen Nick have a bad match. I mean, you've got some real talent there. And then you start throwing in the other guys around it with the Hardys, with Frankie Kazarian. I mean, you've got a real loaded roster. The women's matches, I saw some of the best women's matches there at TNA. I think the roster, Tommy Dreamer, to me, is a heck of a booker. I've sat with Tommy during shows, and he's gone over his creative with me. I've been blown away by Tommy's brain for the business. I think he does an incredible job.
I'm pulling for them. I think they're one of the best kept secrets in wrestling right now. And if you thought it was a 2-horse race, I encourage you, take a look at TNA. You're going to like what you see. And tonight we're going to see your big ass on Monday Night Raw on Netflix, man. How about it? Your mama must be so proud. Look at you. You're making your Netflix debut. Everybody's got Netflix, and now everybody's going to get a dose of JBL. What should we expect tonight, John?
I'm excited. They gave me a call, and I said, hey, I'm thrilled to be coming in. And so fortunately, I believe, Pat McAfee is out, so I'm not for the national championship game. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing. Kind of got an idea a little bit from creative, and it sounds all fun. I'm excited to go back. When you're gone for a while, you just kind of enjoy being back in the arena. You kind of seeing the guys that seeing the new guys. They treat you unbelievably well. It's amazing how well, a lot of people sent out those notes that we got at Christmas, thank you for being a legend and building this business. They just do cool things. And it's just the way they handle legends is, what they call the old guys is just fantastic. I'm excited to go back. And I hope I get to work with Michael Cole. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing, but I hope I get to work with Michael.
You mentioned it this Monday, or as folks are listening, tonight is the college football national championship game. It's the first year we had the playoffs, so it's a little later this year. And we've got Ohio State and Notre Dame squaring off. Ohio State comes in as an 8.5-point favorite, at least at the time we're recording. What's your selection? What do you think happens tonight? If you were a betting man, who would you bet on, John?
I am a betting man, and I've already bet big on Notre Dame. And not because I think Notre Dame wins, but there's almost every sharp bettor I know has taken either 8.5 to 9.5 points on Notre Dame. I think Ohio State's probably the better team. That Notre Dame feels like a special team. They feel like they can win games when you watch them. I mean, that coach there has just done an unbelievable job. I think Ohio State's a better team, and there's a chance Ohio State could beat them by 20. But I think Notre Dame probably keeps it within the 8.5 to 9.5 of the spread. I think Ohio State probably wins.
Back in the day before Netflix, whenever Monday Night Raw would find itself head to head with a big playoff game or a big college football championship game like this, do you remember WWE adjusting the sales at all? Was that even on Vince's radar, or was he so in the WWE bubble that it was just another day at the office?
Yeah, we did. It depends on who it was. You had, a big, obviously when your big marquee matchups, back then the Cowboys, the Giants, your major teams, your Patriots, people like that. When you have a big game, it was always tough. You always had to figure out, and we always would have their game on to see how that game was going. And a lot of times we would tailor our live event based upon what was happening there, similar to what we did with WCW when we were in the wars. Obviously when it was a bad game, no one cared, and you just you put out a regular product. But yeah, it hurt us a lot. Back there in the Attitude Era, when you had the competition between WCW and WWE, they were talking about moving Monday Night Football to a different day because our ratings were that high. I mean, that's why I say it's going to be hard to ever replicate the Attitude Era, but it's hard to measure what the era is now. We didn't have 100 million views on social media either because we didn't have social media. So you measure things differently now. I'm not trying to compare Attitude Era to today. I know people have kind of gotten into that game of doing that. But that time there, that ratings with TV for terrestrial ratings, because the way TV has changed, those will never be equaled. And we really hurt Monday Night Football.
I wanted to ask you one more thing about the TNA news this past week. It's official now. I don't know what that means. It felt like it was official for a while, but it is official. WWE and TNA Wrestling have struck a multi-year partnership that will see TNA pro wrestlers regularly appear on NXT programming and vice versa, WWE told ESPN on Thursday. I mean, this has been happening for a while, but now it feels like it's official. WWE is going to continue to send some talent to TNA and maybe help them draw some houses. And of course, we saw some of that before in another generation with ECW. And now it feels like it's going to be a more formal arrangement that when some of those TNA talent are appearing on NXT, it's almost like it's getting them ready to make the leap. So maybe they'll be more inclined to come to WWE rather than AEW or somewhere else, but just formalizing that partnership, that relationship. I don't think we're actually sharing dollars. That would be not very Nick Khan of us, but we're certainly going to be sharing talent. I like the idea of seeing WWE work with other promotions. What do you expect to change, if anything, in this WWE TNA relationship?
I think the collaboration will be better going back the other way. You saw some TNA guys and girls show up on the NXT shows, it was a huge boost for TNA, but also a big boost for NXT. It gives you something extra. It gives you something different. I don't know if an invasion angle is ever going to be out there. I doubt it. I don't know that. I have no idea what creative is, but I think it's fantastic for both. And I think you're going to start seeing some NXT guys on TNA. And I think that's wonderful because when you're learning the business, as people are learning down at NXT, no matter how great your coaches are, and they have great coaches down there. I mean, Finley to me is Robbie Brookside, and those guys are world class. Finley's one of the best teachers of all time. But no matter how much you have from a coach, you still have one territory. And back in the day, one of the things that happened when guys got to WWE was they had wrestled in several different territories. It was kind of like college football. You knew that a guy was a stud in high school. You knew that everybody on that college football team had been a star somewhere. That was the same pretty much back in the day with WWE. Well, now you bring them up through one territory. I think it's a hard learning process. I think it's harder on these kids that come in. Now you have somewhere else for them to go with TNA. Work with a different group of people, learn a different sets and system, learn different camera people, different producers, everything that you do that changes and adds to that background of education that these young people have before they go to WWE, to me, is going to be very helpful. And I think it does wonders for TNA. It does wonders for NXT. I mean, these are the two companies that they chant their initials. It's hard to overemphasize that. That didn't happen with WWE back in the day. It didn't happen with WCW. We were hot as fire. It happens with groups like ECW when fans taking ownership of it. So you have two groups, NXT and TNA, where fans have taken an ownership of it, and these two groups are working together. I think it's fantastic.
I think it's fantastic too. I'm a big fan of what they're doing in TNA, and I love to see these companies working together. It does create some interesting dynamics and matches and storylines, and we'll see where it goes from here. I can't help but think, you just mentioned that as folks are listening tonight, Pat McAfee is going to be at the football game. Maybe some of that Corey Graves stuff is making a little more sense now. We're hoping that we can make some sense out of 1996, and maybe we'll get into some 1997. We've had a lot of fun talking about your venture through WWE, and this is such an important time. I think when I think back when I was first getting back into wrestling, it was 1996. I quit watching maybe around SummerSlam 92, But I'm flipping through the channels, John, in like August of 96, and I see Hulk Hogan wearing all black. And he's standing there with what I remember as two WCW like enhancement guys, Vinny Vegas and whatever Scott Hall's character was back then, the Diamond Stud, maybe. So, because I missed Razor Ramon, I didn't see that. I missed Diesel, I didn't see that. So I was instantly back in, and I found myself jumping online because that was still the infancy of the internet, and you had all these rumors out there, and I saw there was this whole little subculture of wrestling fans on the internet. And so some legends and some rumors and some tall tales were born out of that era, and we've all just kind of repeated them as fact. So I wanted to run through some of those with you today and let you sort of poke holes in it. I guess we should really start at when you show up on WWF TV. It's like January of 96, and we're only a few months into the Monday Night Wars. As a reminder, Nitro started on Labor Day, so call it the very beginning of September. So we're 4 months into that run. What was the difference in the office then and now for WWE? Because it feels like that is almost like black and white war footage by the scale and scope of the company today. Is that the way you feel about it?
That's a great question, a terrific question. And I can't answer that question as far as what it is now, because I'm not there now with WWE. You know, I think to me, Hunter has done an incredible job, and Hunter has always been the only one I thought that could take over for Vince. He's not only taken over, he's taken it to a different level, which it's just shocking how good they are. But I don't know the dynamic now. When I go in there, I deal with them, but not on a level like I dealt when I was talent and dealing with them as part of the roster. The difference, though, if you're asking, say, from the Vince McMahon era, you know, that ended around 2020 or whenever that was, between that and 1996, it wasn't that different. It really wasn't. And now you didn't have writers. You had Pat and Bruce, and that was it. And Jerry would help out. There was a main agent. You know, we had George and Tony and some different agents. That was all the same. But now you have a huge writing team, and things kind of go through a corporate structure. I say that now. I'm talking about a few years ago when I was with WWE, not now as with Hunter and Nick and Bruce and those guys. I don't know that dynamic. But it was different as far as the corporate structure. Back then, it was just Vince and Bruce. You know, it was pretty simple. You know, and Pat. It was just pretty simple about what you had and what you were going to do.
I also want to remind you that the whole Monday Night War thing, I've always felt like was really created by, I guess it was the log cabin address for WCW in Main Street in Stamford. That's just like something a handful of wrestling executives came up with. The real winners in the war, because usually there's a winner and a loser in a war, the real winners were the fans and the talent, right?
100%. I mean, when I got to WWE, I got there in December of 95. I signed in January of 96. We couldn't give tickets away. Business was terrible. And you had probably the most loaded roster in the history of the world. Now, you can argue other rosters were as good. I'm not sure you can argue any rosters were better. We had everybody there except for, say, Hogan and Goldberg. Rock came in later that year of the Attitude Era. You know, we had Scott and Kevin. They weren't the NWO yet, but they were with us. Brett was with us. You had all these great superstars that were going to be huge stars in Attitude Era just a few years later with Stone Cold, but he was a ringmaster. Kane was a dentist. Triple H was an aristocrat. Road Dogg was rockabilly. You know, you had all these guys that were there, this incredible talent. The house shows were unbelievable how good they were, but we couldn't give away tickets. For whatever reason, we had guys in wrong characters, guys that didn't work. But then when the Attitude Era happened, all of a sudden the fans got to see these guys that were incredible stars come out of these characters that weren't working. And the fans were huge winners in this. I can tell you the old live events, when we would have a 3-hour show somewhere and we were sold out everywhere after Steve got hot, those shows were some of the best I've ever seen. You couldn't talk guys into going less than 20 minutes. You couldn't talk Steve into going less than 30 and 40 in the main event. I mean, guys wanted to work, and guys wanted to work hard, and guys wanted to show that they could belong to that roster. It was an incredible time.
I wanted to ask you about the Billionaire Ted's Wrestling War Room skits. You know, you're coming in where they're starting to do these. They're mocking Ted Turner and WCW. Eventually, they do take some cheap shots, I guess, at Ted's mental health issues. But these skits really didn't serve a purpose in WWE storylines. Like, it's not like this is building to a match. It's not like there's actual on-air talent who's going to be appearing in this. I don't know. It would be hard for me to imagine Vince doing this in 2024.
They were horrible. I thought they were funny. I mean, they were funny. You know, it's like a guy humor. And by the way, I got to give you a little background story. So when I first met with Vince, you know, I've told the story before here. You know, I get signed when I come in for the tryout match by Gerald Briscoe. I go to WWE headquarters. I'd never met Vince. Vince didn't even see my tryout match. So this is the first time he's ever met me. And so I'm sitting there with him, JJ Dillon, Lisa Wolf, and he looks at me and he goes, I have in mind a really unique idea. I'm going to make you a heel ballerina. And he sat there and looked at me, and I thought, you know, my other friend that I tagged with in the Zwei Meter und Zwei tag team came over here and became a heel dentist in Kane. And I thought, this son of a bitch is crazy. I mean, he's crazy. And I'm sitting there looking at him like, I turned down WCW for this. I'm like, do you think I could still get I'm sitting there thinking, can I get my deal back? And all of a sudden he goes, ha, 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 ha. I love the cowboy gimmick. And I'm like, oh my God, this man's nuts. And I right away just thought that, fell in love with the guy. I thought it was funny. But it was shocking when he first told me I was going to be a heel ballerina. Well, then I come in and you've got these freaking Billionaire Ted skits. I'm like, he really is crazy. Which, in my opinion, in a good way. I thought these skits didn't serve any purpose. But if I'm a guy trying to stay survival and you got this billionaire that's messing with you, trying to sign talent away, I think I might have done the same thing. I thought they were funny. I thought they were cute. I don't think they did anything for wrestling.
I do want to ask you about the crowds. You've noted to me that the crowds were pretty small when you first joined the company. What's interesting is the live attendance for WWE really bottomed out in 95. So it's actually ticking up a little bit thanks to the three-way title matches they were running when you first get on the main roster. I think at the time it was Brett, Diesel, and The Undertaker. So I wanted to ask you, because your recollection is that they were smaller crowds. Am I to infer from you saying that in an email to us that they were smaller crowds back then, that it was not the size of the crowd you expected, having worked in Germany, having worked through Europe, having been in Mexico, and now that you've been on some of these larger indie shows? I mean, not like you expected it to be like the global sportatorium shows, but I kind of get the impression that you maybe expected there would be bigger crowds there than there really were. No,
we had bigger crowds in Germany than some of the crowds we worked in front of in WWE.
Wow.
The crowds were horrible. And I saw the same note that you had with the 95 was worse. Well, or early 95. Well, thank God I wasn't there then.
Right.
They were terrible then. We had my tryout match was different because we had a emergency a snowstorm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I bet there wasn't 250 people there that night. 250 people. They put them all behind the hard cam on the opposite side. 90% of the arena was empty, and that was a small arena, and that was a snowstorm. I get that, but we worked some shows. They would sit there. Steve Rubin would sit there and place people on opposite hard cam to make the angles look good, because you had to. Majority of the arena was empty. I mean, I remember one time we were in Reunion, and it was so bad. It was like the place was empty. It was actually mentioned to Vince running the Sportatorium one time in Dallas because we couldn't draw tickets in Reunion. You know, sometimes you had problems in old wrestling territories. You know, you didn't do well sometimes in the Von Erich's territory. You didn't do well sometimes in Lawler's territory. It kind of depended on attractions. Now, Stone Cold changed all that, but a lot of that you didn't draw in old wrestling territories for whatever reason because they're used to their guys. But we couldn't sell tickets. Now, Vince at that point said, well, I can't go to the Sportatorium. It just looks bad. And so we stayed in the big arenas because of optics. But I remember the first time we had $100,000 a gate. It was in the Meadowlands. We had $107,000. And I thought, man, that is fantastic. I'm at $100,000 gate. Now, this is back in 96. I get that. But still, you have $100,000 gate a few years later, you think, brother, we got to fire the main event. These guys aren't drawing nothing. I mean, attendance was bad. It wasn't my perception of what I thought attendance should be. Everybody saw it. Now, was it on an uptick? Apparently it was, based upon what you said. But attendance was freaking terrible. I mean, awful. And we had incredible matches. We had incredible shows, and we had incredible stars.
Let me ask you another thing that I wanted to talk about from that era is there's this narrative out there that the Clique had been running roughshod. And if you were reading the torch in 1995, even the last few months of 1995, it feels like it is a major story behind the scenes, that they're hurting morale. And, you know, there are other factions that we would hear about, like the Bone Street Crew, BSK with the Undertaker and all that jazz. And I know you're here at the very beginning of 96, and a few months into your run is when we're going to see Scott Hall and Kevin Nash go down south to work for Ted Turner. But did you see, I mean, what did you make of the Clique? Just what was their real influence that you saw in 1996?
Scott and Kevin and Sean treated me fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I didn't see them mistreat anybody. Not one person. No, I think I was there. And I think there's a little bit of revisionist history. I'm not sure what it was during the time that people were saying that the Clique was such a bad influence. The Clique had a lot of influence. I mean, a lot of influence. But top guys generally do. And when you have top guys that are all kind of together, you have an inordinate amount of influence. And now I understand having to deal with them from a role like Vince McMahon or Gerald Briscoe or Bruce can be completely different as compared to a talent to talent interaction. But that's bullshit. I'm bullshit. There wasn't the locker room division like you say. We had the problem because we weren't making money. That was the biggest issue we had back then. It wasn't because the BSK was in one crew and the Canadians were in another, and you had the Clique in another. To me, there was not that problem with the locker room division. Now, there was between Sean and Brett. They had a personal problem. And that was, I say personal, I think it's more professional than it was anything else. They both wanted the same spot. And for whatever reason, they didn't get along, personally. They didn't get along. And we saw that. There was a couple of fights backstage between those two guys. And those things happen. When you have high-octane personalities and you're both fighting for the same spot, those things tend to overboil sometimes in a bathroom somewhere. But no, I don't. I was there, and I did not see that.
Something I do want to ask if you saw is a story we recently covered with Jim Ross on Grilling JR. We talked about Sunny and how maybe at times she wasn't given a fair shake in life. And of course, we know now, that she had some mental health issues that were undiagnosed all those years, and substance issues were born out of that. And now she is behind bars. So just a tragic, sad tale all around for Sunny. But there is a legendary story that once when she was overseas in 1996, she ended her romance, if you will, with Shawn Michaels. Of course, that was quote unquote behind Chris Candido's back. But on this same tour is where someone allegedly defecated in her food and she wanted to come home. As the story goes, the company needed some tapes to be returned to America, and normally that would go back with a referee. But HR at the time decided maybe we can avoid a lawsuit and just bring her home early. She didn't sue the company, but apparently she did eat a shit sandwich, John. What do you remember about this?
First of all, I'm not going to answer anything about her and Shawn Michaels. That's a personal thing between them two, and I have no idea what was going on. I've heard all the rumors, and I've heard Shawn talk about it. That's something personal, and I'm not going to. Shawn is a dear friend, and I'm not going to address any of that because I don't think it's pertinent, in my opinion, to the story. I was there on that tour. So that was my first tour. It's pretty cool. We had a lot of fun. I'll tell you some stories about that tour. That's where I got the name Clothesline from Hell from Stone Cold Steve Austin. But the tour was awesome. We were like over there 23 something days, and Scott and Kevin had already signed with WCW. So they didn't have to come. They did this as a favor. Now understand, Germany was the only place we made money during that time. We were not making money big in the States. And so you would get a lot of times, Tim White would come around and Arnie would come around and give you a draw. It'd be $200. You know, Barry Windham always told me when they're offering money, kid, always take it. So he'd always take the draw. We would owe the company money sometimes.
Oh,
business was so bad. So you get a draw somewhere down in a show somewhere, $200. The company would send you a debit for $50. I don't think they ever paid you below $150. But they would send you a debit for $50. So when you talk about business was bad, business was terrible. And who's to blame? Nobody, because those same stars created the biggest era maybe in wrestling history just a few years later. But Scott and Kevin didn't have to go on this tour.
Right.
They did this as a favor to us. And I think that kind of their way of saying goodbye, it was really cool. And they were great on the tour. I see all this stuff on the internet. It's like, I was there. I don't know what they're talking about. So what happened with Sonny was people talked about, I saw some of the notes that one of your guys sent from, the newsletters back in the day about how they tortured Sonny this whole tour. That's not true. 100% not true. So I'm sitting there on the bus. Now, I don't know anybody. I've come in. I just know a few guys I'd worked with in Europe and Japan and Texas. And so me and Gerald Briscoe are pretty good friends already. And I would sit up front with him a lot. We play cards and things like that. So I'm sitting there with Gerald Briscoe, and Sonny gets on the bus, and George Steele is sitting right next to us. Me and Gerald Briscoe are sitting there facing each other in one of those chairs, that has a table in between. So we're sitting there opposite the table so we can play cards. And she gets on and announces in front of everybody. She goes, I missed my tanning. I missed my workout. And I missed going to the gym because Scott Hall and Kevin Nash went out last night and were late for the bus. And she goes, something needs to be done about this. And I'm sitting there. I looked at Gerald Briscoe and I said, she just stooged two guys who don't have to be here, who don't care. And there's nothing you can do to them in front of everybody. And I sat there and looked at Jerry and I said, this doesn't end well. And Jerry goes, nope, it sure doesn't. It wasn't 2 days later. That's when they said, what did Sonny have for breakfast? I don't know. She had a shit-eating grin. Oh. there were a lot of great jokes that came out of that, but that's the reason it happened. The reason it happened was not because these guys were. Listen, you can say whatever you want about what I say did. I'm not going to say who did it. It was not Scott and Kevin, by the way. I will say that, but you can say whatever happened about how bad it was. But it was not just a matter of, hey, we're going to pick on her. It was she was stooging the boys, and the guys didn't like it, and they took matters in their own hands.
Can you imagine if that story, because that's what's so fascinating about wrestling, besides like the Corey Graves angle where we can't tell, is this real? Is this a shoot? Or what's really going on here? I love that about wrestling. But I also love that we're all just so casual about what's happening here. Can you imagine in any, like in my mortgage office, can you imagine if someone shit in the boss's food? Like that would be crazy. Like, what is going on? Like
Conrad, it's inexplicable. It is inexplicable. I mean, that's something that no human being should do. And it happened. It happened quite often back in the day. I'm not saying it's okay. It's not. But the guys used to end up with, turds in their bags, it was, I like to see.
Why are turds so over in wrestling, do you think?
What's that?
Why are turds so over in wrestling? Because it feels like Mr. Perfect, Sean Walt, there's a handful of serial shitters, and this has become their thing. Like, I don't even, but these stories don't exist outside of wrestling. I've never heard football stories of people shitting in each other's food or any other genre of entertainment.
Well, now wait a minute. There's some with baseball players. Yes. Yeah. I was, oh my goodness. I don't know if I should say the name because he's a dear friend, but we were on a hunting trip one time and Draws came up to me and said, hey, I just caught so-and-so about the shit in my bed. And I said, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. It's actually pretty cool. Shit, Draws goes, yeah, it actually kind of is. Draws wanted to fight him, but it was.
Wait, hang on. Are you saying Wade Boggs used to shit in people's beds?
Well, I think Draws caught him before he did.
I love it.
See, I'm trying not to give out Wade. Wade's one of the best guys ever. He had one of the greatest ribs ever on Jeff Foxworthy. I mean, just one of the greatest ribs ever on Jeff Foxworthy. Foxworthy walked into the bar one night. We're at this hunting thing, and he put his wallet on the bar, and he goes, "I can't whip anybody in here." And we're full of wrestlers. You know, Steiner's were there. Big Boss Man was there. He said, "But somebody will beat up Wade Boggs. You can have whatever's in my wallet." It was one of the greatest things ever.
I love that.
So Draws comes to me. Draws had done something to Wade. I can't remember what it was. And we're on a hunting trip, and Draws comes down to me and goes, "I just caught Wade trying to shit in my bed." I just started laughing. I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, he was taking a dump in my bed." And I said, "You know, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. The guy's got 3,000 hits." And he goes, "Yeah, it is pretty cool." He goes, "But he shouldn't be shitting in my bed." I go, "Probably not." Draws had done something, you know, horsing around with him, and realized that Wade was a different level.
Well, we'll get more shit stories in the future with John, I'm sure. I do want to talk about your run in WWE. I think you make your debut on Superstars in early '96 against Bob Holly. Bob has developed quite a reputation in the internet wrestling community. What was your experience like working with Bob?
I loved working with him. I worked with Bob so many times. I don't know how many times, probably 50, 75 times, I'm guessing. We were first match every single night. I mean, we were first match for this loaded card every single night. It was awesome. I worked also a lot with Al Snow and Marty Jannetty, but mainly with Bob. I mean, Bob's a super tough guy, and he loves to work hard, and he loves stiffing people, and he loves getting stiff back. You know, Bob just enjoys playing rough, and it was fun. I really enjoyed being out there with Bob. It was a lot of fun being out there with him, wrestling with him. We had a lot of fun working shows.
Cagematch.com or .net rather says you've shared the ring 83 times with Bob Holly through the years.
Holy cow, that's awesome.
Yeah. What was
you never know when you're guessing, you know, how many matches you had. You know, you say, "Oh, I wrestled him a couple hundred times." You know, it's always the phrase. You know, when I said 75, I'm just guessing, but that's what I thought. So it's good to have an actual number. That seems right.
I mean, it's pretty crazy too. When you take a look at 96, I mean, it feels like you worked him pretty regular all over the country. San Jose, Austin, Beaumont, Tyler, Houston, Hershey, Peoria, Moline, Rosemont, Anaheim, Albany, Worcester, Portland, Bangor, Spokane, San Francisco, Fresno, Anaheim, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Nova Scotia. I mean, you're all over the place. When you work a guy that many times in a run like that, say between, because I think you got going with him in like March, and you guys work it pretty consistently through November. When you're working a guy that often, do you have, because we've all heard like the legendary stories where like Harley's laying out a match with Terry or something like that, and they would say something like, "Hey, we're going to do Dallas tonight, or we're going to do St. Louis." Like they had a series of matches that they like to work together as far as their chapter and verse of the story of the match. Do you have that sort of thing with Bob Holly, or are you guys having shorter matches and you're trying to work on a few things you think you might do on TV, or how do you keep yourself entertained when you are going to be working the same opponent around the horn like that?
We were working one time in Nashville. We were on TV, and we thought we were on later in the night. And it turned out I'm sitting there in my boots and just, thank God, had just been laced. And one of them I was lacing up the other one, and they go, "Hey, John, you're up." And all of a sudden I hear Bob Holly's music playing. Thank God his music was first. I'm in the locker room. And I didn't realize where we were on the card. They had changed it or something. So I go flying up to Gorilla. There's Bob. And I said, "Bob, what are we doing?" And he told me like 8 minutes or something. I said, "Who's going over?" And I can't remember who it was. It me or, you know, obviously me or him. And I said, "Okay, I'll see you out there." And that was it. We didn't talk over nothing. It was just fun. And we tried to do things different, but also we had a responsibility, Conrad. We had a responsibility to start the show off right.
Right.
You know, we didn't start off with the yay boo spot. You know, the crowds were so freaking hot. There's a temptation there to work the crowd a little bit. Well, you got to say that for the big guys. You got to say that for the guys that are in those spots that do that and people come to see. Not for me and Bob Holly. And we knew that. And so we would go out there, we go straight into the match. We didn't go outside the ring. We just had a good 6 to 10 minute match and got out of there and just tried to be entertaining. get people in their seats, show them something, a lot of fun, a lot of movement, a lot of, hopefully entertaining match. But that was the whole reason we were out there, was to get the show started off right. And we took great pride in that.
I want to ask you about working with Dutch Mantel, friend of the show. He has an excellent podcast with our buddy James. You should check out if you haven't already. But you're working with him as, I think his name was Uncle Zebekiah or something like that. What did you think of working with Dutch? This feels like it would have been right up your alley.
Oh, Dutch was so fun. I don't know anybody who has a bad word to say about Dutch. Well, maybe Ric Flair. I think him and Rick have kind of gotten crosswise over the years. But I think that's a personality issue, not an issue about whether Dutch is a good guy or not. But Dutch was just entertaining as could be. He's very, very smart. Dutch was a great booker. Dutch did terrific business booking down in Puerto Rico and every place he booked. Dutch is a really smart guy and fun to be around. My first match, when I came in for that snowstorm against Sabio Vega, Dutch said, "Hey, got anybody go out with you?" Of course not. I didn't bring a manager with me from Europe. And so he said, "Well, I'll go out with you." So he asked, I forget who it was, the agent was, "Can I go out with him?" Dutch said, they said, "Yeah." So that's how Dutch ended up with me. He just had nobody to work with. And he saw me there. We were talking. We had a good time. We enjoyed each other. And that's kind of how we ended up together. So they put me and Dutch together. And Dutch was awesome. We had so much fun. The faces he would make, especially when I do the job, where he would just look like the most disappointed human being on the planet, like he was about to cry. It was so entertaining.
I do want to ask you about your first WrestleMania. Of course, WrestleMania 12 is the one where Shawn Michaels achieves his boyhood dream. And I want to ask you about that because allegedly Bill Watts, who was a part of the company, believe it or not, leaves the WWF in 1995. He was supposed to be helping with the booking, and I guess he felt pretty strongly that Vince was making a mistake by pivoting to Shawn Michaels. He thought Brett was doing a fine job and we should have continued with Brett, but it's going to be Shawn's turn. We know Bill was not in favor of it. How do you think that decision was met in the locker room? Like, we've heard at times, well, respectfully, this is a different Shawn Michaels today in 2025 than the one we're talking about in 96. And he had a reputation for being tough to deal with. From your perspective, was the locker room in favor of the move with going with Shawn, or how was Shawn received by and large amongst the boys?
I think the locker room didn't care either way. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Brett or Shawn. We had two guys that were world-class talents, two Hall of Famers. We knew that at the time. Brett was a freaking great world champion. I mean, he's everything you want and just a great world champion. Shawn was this new shiny toy that was freaking amazing. And the only way I can tell you about Shawn is to tell you like the best game nobody ever saw. When Michael Jordan, the YouTube video, they don't have a lot of footage of the practice, but when the Dream Team decided to play each other, and I think Chuck Daly put these guys against each other, and Jordan goes off on the Dream Team. They start talking a little smack to Jordan, which is something you didn't do with Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan, the greatest ensemble of NBA talent ever, showed that he was head and shoulders better than anybody else. He famously walked in the locker room afterwards and told Bird and Magic, he goes, "Hey, there's a new sheriff in town." And either Bird or Magic, one of the ones said to the other one, goes, "He's right." That's how good Jordan was. That's how good Shawn was. I say that all the time about Shawn. When Shawn was on top in 95 and 96, we had a loaded roster.
Yeah.
Shawn was that much better. People talk about, man, we need, 20 Shawn Michaels today. We didn't have 20 then. We had one. Shawn could do things that just were inexplicable out there. He would go out there. I don't know if it was feel. I don't know what it was, but Shawn was just unbelievable. So when you're looking at the locker room, you got a choice between Shawn Michaels, who I just described how I certainly felt about him, and you've got one of the greatest world champions of all time in Bret Hart. We don't we don't care. They're both great. I mean, they're both world class, and so there was an animosity there between the boys about Shawn. I've read some of these old newsletter clips that Shawn was so hard to deal with. I'm sure he could have been. Talking to Gerald Briscoe, he could be tough if you're in that position. He wasn't for the boys. He was just one of us. Whatever was going on, but Shawn performed. Undertaker said, they didn't necessarily get along great, but they loved being in the ring with each other. And no matter what you thought about Shawn was so good that, and by the way, I said, no matter what you thought about him, I had great interactions with Shawn, just like I said with Scott and Kevin. There was not this animosity between the boys like was written about. That to me is either revisionist history or somebody that was outside the dressing room that doesn't really know what was going on.
Well, I mean, let's just talk about some names because you've mentioned that a few times now. But Bam Bam Bigelow and Shane Douglas and guys like that, Chris Candido, they were not fans of Shawn Michaels. And they say that, at times he made their life a living hell, and they've all told their stories individually. Yep. I mean, I think the general consensus is Shawn Michaels was a bit of a brat, and it almost feels like you're taking issue with that. But you've also said, hey man, we were bored. We didn't have the internet. People were looking for ways to entertain themselves. Are Shane Douglas and Chris Candido and Bam Bam Bigelow, they're all making that up, or were they just on the receiving end of some ribs that maybe weren't so fun for them?
Their perception is reality, and whatever they perceived is their reality. And I'm not going to say that Shane made up anything. I'm sure Shane, whatever he said, is speaking the truth. Okay. So now, that also being said, people said the same thing about John Cena. People said the same thing about everybody being on top. Almost anybody that's been on top has detractors, and people say, oh, that guy was such an asshole. That guy was this, that guy was that. I mean, you look at anybody on top. People say the same thing about Randy Orton. I love Randy. I love John. Love Shawn. I mean, people that had issues a lot of times blamed that top guy. Now, was he at fault? Don't know. I have no idea about what happened with Shane. And I'm sure he's telling the truth as he knows it.
Yes.
And perception is reality. But you had the same with any top guy over the last 100 years in this business of guys who say, man, he undercut me. He cost me my job.
Let me ask you about that main event at WrestleMania 12, the Iron Man match. I have taken some criticism online because I hated it, John. I just don't like the idea of an Iron Man match in general. I think what I really enjoy about wrestling is the same thing I enjoy about boxing and UFC. Like, it can technically end at any minute, and I want to sit at the edge of my seat and, what's going to happen? Who's going to win? How's it going to happen? But when I know they're going to wrestle for 60 minutes regardless, then I feel like, okay, I know the story. Now I really just need to see the finish. I didn't need to watch the first 55 minutes, especially when we're going to go scoreless or we're going to have some sort of a tie and then we go into overtime. What do you think of the stipulation as an Iron Man match? Because to me, it feels like perhaps the worst stip match of all time. It would be way below a cage match or a lumberjack match or anything like that. But what do you think about an Iron Man match? And did you feel like that was a worthy WrestleMania main event? It feels like a departure from years prior where we would see Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior or something. Now we've got Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart going more than 60 minutes. It feels like a shift and maybe in the way Vince was thinking about wrestling.
Yeah. And I think the shift is important. They're getting away from Hogan and the Warrior, and you've got these two guys who are unbelievable wrestlers going to do stuff that Hogan and the Warrior couldn't do. Now, that being said, was Hogan a great worker? Everybody in the world remembers when he slammed the Giant, so he's a pretty damn good worker. I agree with you 100% about the Iron Man match. I think they're horrible. What do you do when you're 35 minutes in? You got 25 minutes left before you have a winner. You know that. I thank God I was never in one. For one, I didn't want to go 60 minutes by a clock. But I think they're terrible. And I completely agree with you. I would rather Shawn and Bret go an hour and 15 minutes unannounced and all of a sudden just turn in an hour performance than go by an hour dictated performance by an Iron Man match. I completely agree with you. I think it's a horrible concept. That being said, Shawn and Bret about the only one of the couple of ones that I think could do it. I thought Shawn and Bret was a great match. I watched the whole match. It was my first WrestleMania. I remember watching Shawn rappel from the ceiling, and I was so in awe of what he did. I literally thought, I should go back to Japan. I literally thought that because I thought I don't belong here. This is beyond me. It was that incredible to watch. And then you watch the whole spectacle of the match. I thought what they did was fantastic. I thought the stipulation was horrible.
Were you there the night before when they're doing the walkthrough on the rappelling? Did you see Vince come down?
No, I wish I had. I heard all about it, but no, I heard all about it.
I know
you did the same thing with Gronk during COVID.
During the pandemic. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, did you see that one? I mean, have you seen Vince do some of these crazy stunts? The narrative has always been Vince won't ask you to do anything that he's not willing to do himself. Did you see that in real life?
100%. Yeah. I saw the Gronk thing. I was there. Not anybody there during COVID. Vince got up and just fell off, and it was it. It was. I remember one time, I was an agent for about 2 hours one time. And I came in and had Braun Strowman was going to choke slam a guy on his belly or something like that, backward choke slam. I thought it was a great spot. And all Vince asked me, because I went there and told him, I said, hey, we want to try this different. He goes, Vince looked at me, goes, would you take it? And I thought about it. I said, yeah, I would. He goes, okay, fine. And that was it. It was just a matter of, making sure I wouldn't do something, ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do. So, yeah, Vince always was like that.
I want to ask you about the curtain call too, because not long after WrestleMania is when we see the very last appearance for Scott Hall and Kevin Nash as their Razor Ramon and Diesel characters in Madison Square Garden. And of course, famously, this is where they do the curtain call, all the baby faces and heels together, members of the Clique. You see Triple H and Shawn Michaels on the right, and on the left, it's Razor and Diesel. And these are baby faces and heels, and they're all sharing an embrace. And allegedly, they got permission ahead of time from Vince to do this. What did you think of them doing this, and was it a big deal in 1996?
It was a big deal, and I had real hesitation about it. I don't think I was mad about it. I know that a lot of guys were, furious. Davey Boy was wanting to fight over it. It was. There were a lot of guys who were really upset about it. I didn't think it was a good idea, but I wasn't that mad at it, and especially later you found out that Vince had okayed it. I don't think he don't think he realized what he was okaying. But they did get it cleared. So it was strange to me. And I remember hearing it, and some guys I wasn't there. Dutch and I were booked somewhere else at the time. We heard about it right away, and there were a lot of guys really, really upset about it. I was not one of those guys who was really upset about it, because I was trying to think it through about, did it make sense? Did it not make sense? Is this going to hurt the Garden next time? I was more waiting to see. And if we went to the Garden next time and the crowd was in half, we know that was a bad decision, but that wasn't the case. And so I had a lot of hesitation about it, but I was not that mad about it. A lot of guys were furious.
Who were the guys who were upset? Just respectfully, older fellows?
Yeah. Taker has said he was upset about it. Davey Boy was furious. Furious. But now also there was a bit of an issue, of Davey with his association with Brett, and he had that, Davey, I think it's the one that broke up the fight with Brett and Sean in the bathroom. So, Davey Boy had a little bit of that personality there that, had a little dislike already because of the association with Brett. But Davey was upset about it, and he was not wrong. I didn't think anybody was wrong. I didn't think the guys that were upset were wrong. I didn't think the guys that said it was okay were wrong, which is crazy to say, but there wasn't an answer for it. It hadn't been done before. And so I was of the mindset that we should wait and see how it plays out.
What did you think of Triple H being the one who was quote unquote punished? Allegedly, he was supposed to win the King of the Ring in 1996. And I guess he meets with Vince, and Vince tells him something like, you're going to have to learn to eat shit and love the taste of it.
Yep. And he did. And I have a lot of respect for Hunter from that. A lot of respect. They punished Hunter. They beat him. And he never said a word. He took it like a man. He didn't roll over on his buddies. He didn't say, why me? Hunter simply just took it, went on with it, thought, you know what? I'm going to walk through hell, and eventually I'm going to come out on the other side, and I'll be fine. And a lot of us, I haven't talked to a lot of the guys about it, got a lot of respect for Hunter during that time because of that, the way he handled himself by getting punished. When the other guys either didn't or couldn't get punished, Hunter took it and he swallowed it. And he handled it, like an absolute man. I thought it was very respectful the way Hunter did it. Which, by the way, this was after Hunter got in the fight with the fan over in that European tour right before this, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we were we all, that fan almost died. Not because of Hunter beat him up, but Hunter, we were standing there probably 30 feet from the ring, and the match ends, and we go to the bus to get beer, and they come on, they're going, "Man, you missed the fight." I go, "What fight?" There wasn't a fight. They go, "Yeah, there's a huge fight in the ring. Hunter beat up somebody." I said, "Really?" And said, "Yeah." And so he had all the boys right there. It would have been a massacre if we'd still been there. But as soon as the bell rang, we went to the bus to make sure we got our beer. And we came on and found out that Hunter had beat up the fan. And Hunter got a lot of respect for that. You say you don't know if, you don't know guys are tough. Hunter didn't have an amateur background of wrestling or MMA or something, but you don't know until they're down and have to do something, what they do. And Hunter had a lot of respect from that. And then he went through that punishment there. Hunter got a lot of respect during that time for the way he handled himself.
As a reminder, although he was punished and he didn't win King of the Ring the next month, he did win the Intercontinental title 5 months later, and we were off to the races. The pairing he did with Mr. Perfect, and I know Mr. Perfect winds up leaving and going to WCW, but I really enjoyed his feud with Mark Marrow and the involvement of Mr. Perfect and winning the white Intercontinental title. Who would have thought that was what was next for Triple H? But I do want to ask you about Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, because we see that they're going to go to WCW for what they've talked about as being Sting money. That was the phrase used. Do you remember hearing Sting money being thrown?
Yeah, I do. And it may have been from them. You love to put something like a moniker on something.
Yes.
And so that was like the Sting money. It wasn't like a derogatory term. It was never that. It was just like, I'm going to get Sting money. I'm going to get Sting money. That guy just say it all the time. It was a fun thing to say. No one had any animosity towards Sting from it. It was a fun thing to say. And that became the thing that you wanted was Sting money.
I know that Vince wasn't a fan of it, but when you saw the story that they were trying to do on WCW programming before Hulk Hogan joins the fray, when they're just referred to as the outsiders, and we're sort of implying, hey, you want a war? Well, you got one. Like, we're implying certainly that these guys are under Vince McMahon's employ for the WWE, and they're trying to take over here in WCW and have a interpromotional war. We know that couldn't be further from the truth. I think Vince probably felt like that was dirty pool at the time. What did you think of that?
I thought it was incredible. Absolutely incredible. We all did, except for Vince, Vince and probably, Briscoe and Bruce and guys that were in the office, because they're the ones fighting the war. We're the soldiers. So, and we had no problem with the other soldiers, they're just fighting, for their leaders as well. But I thought it was fantastic. I mean, that was the angle of the century. I mean, I don't know what storyline. You tell me. Mr. McMahon was a better storyline in the history of the business than that invasion angle. I'd never seen guys leave the territory before. And, I'd been in a lot of different places, but not big territories, but good territories. And I had not seen guys leave. And when we lost Scott and Kevin, and then we're about to lose Brett, I just remember thinking, what the hell's going to happen? And I think I chose the wrong horse here. Or at least I thought like Texas, where I'd missed the run. I came along after the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. And I thought, man, I missed the run here too. I mean, God almighty, this is brutal. And Lanza was sitting there, he had that cigarette, and he's sitting there and he says, kid, as long as we got that guy in the chair, we're fine. I've seen Hogan leave. I've seen Warrior leave. As long as he's there, talking about Vince, he goes, we're going to be fine. And I started feeling much better about it then. But that angle to me, which, by the way, when people talk about AEW right now, that do they have a chance against WWE? The answer to me, and people are going to clip this out and use it as a soundbite, is no, they don't, unless things change significantly. WCW in the early 90s was losing $10 million a year. After Eric Bischoff takes over, they're making $40 million plus a year a few years later. It's one of the biggest corporate turnarounds in history. If you'd have asked us back then, is there a chance that WCW is ever competition to WWE? No one would have said yes. No one. Nobody. But along came Eric Bischoff. Something changed significantly. They tried this, announcer that was not even a main announcer to put him in charge, and he issued one of the biggest corporate turnarounds in history. And he brought in this angle. A lot of it fell into it. I mean, you had the right people with Scott, Kevin, and Hulk, but you had the right guy with Eric, and things changed. And so when I look at, what could happen in the future, 10 years from now in wrestling, you don't know, because you don't know a black swan event like something like Eric Bischoff that could happen.
Man, I'm loving talking about 1996, but I do want to ask you, when you're taking a look, I know you're not actually there, and I don't even imagine you had an opportunity to buy the pay-per-view, but what's your reaction when you hear that Hulk Hogan has become a bad guy? Like, that felt and I know in 2025 that doesn't feel like a big deal. Hell, he just got booed on Netflix a week ago. But back in 1996, that was kind of unfathomable. What did you think about that?
Yeah, it was unfathomable. And I realized when they did that they are hitting on all cylinders. I've heard Eric talk about the fact when we got Mike Tyson that he thought, oh, shit, we're in trouble. And I remember when Hogan turned heel, I thought the same thing. Oh, shit, we're in trouble, because they're hitting on all cylinders. I mean, you turn the biggest babyface, maybe in the history of the business, heel, with this invasion angle. That's probably the best storyline, at least I thought of at the time in the history of the business. Man, we're in trouble. That's just, I think all of us thought the same thing. I thought these guys are killing it right now. We're in the wrong side of ass whooping right now.
By the way, the night that Hulk Hogan is turning heel in Daytona Beach, you were in Providence, Rhode Island at the Civic Center. Here's what the card looked like that night on July 7th, 1996. Duke Drosay pinned Leif Cassidy with a power slam. Salvatore Sincere pinned Barry Horowitz. Henry and Phineas Godwin beat Skip and Zip, the tag team champions. Cloudy chased Sonny backstage. Jannetty and Leif Cassidy were supposed to be in the match, but they're not on the show as a tag team because Jannetty was a no-show. Davey Boy Smith was missing, so you get to replace him against Jake Roberts. Jake beat you with a DDT that night. The Undertaker beat Mankind by countout after hitting him with a chair on the arena floor. Ahmed Johnson would beat Goldust. Steve Austin beat Savio Vega. Mark Mero beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And in the main event, it's Shawn Michaels and Vader with a super kick getting it done. I mean, this is a loaded roster. I know when I started with Duke Drosay, maybe you didn't think that, but as you run through that, I mean, look at all the Hall of Famers up and down. It's an interesting.
That was Bruce. Bruce hates the show.
Bruce would be happy to hear that we're at least talking about something that Bruce really, really needs. Jeans. I recently got a pair from the Perfect Jean. Actually, both Bruce and I did. They're basically the unicorn of jeans. They fit like a dream. They look fantastic, and they're so comfortable you'll forget you're wearing pants. In case you didn't know, this is indeed an ad. The Perfect Jean told me to say this, but I wouldn't lie about how awesome the jeans are. They really do live up to the name. Picture this. There's 700,000 pairs of nuts rescued from bad jeans. That's 2 per dude. The real hero, the Perfect Jean. Say goodbye to stiff cardboard denim and hello to comfort. These jeans feel like they're custom made. They stretch like you wouldn't believe, and they look fantastic. The fabric is as soft as a baby's bottom. There's no babies involved, I promise. And they're durable enough to survive her pulling them down daily. Yeah. The Perfect Jean also has some seriously massive range of sizes from 6 fits, from skinny to thick. We're talking waist sizes from 26 to 50 and lengths from 26 to 38. So it doesn't matter if you're a short king, a thick daddy, or something in between. You can find the perfect fit for the body you're rocking. And for a limited time, our listeners can get 15% off their orders plus free shipping at theperfectjean.nyc, or just Google The Perfect Jean and use the code WRESTLE15 and you'll get 15% off. I want to mention that they don't just stop with jeans at The Perfect Jean. They've revolutionized t-shirts as well. The Perfect Tee has just enough stretch to hide that beer belly while accentuating your arms and chest for that flawless look. It's as soft as butter. It's not going to shrink in the wash like all your other tees. It really is just perfect. And The Perfect Jean always has free shipping, exchanges, and returns. You can have peace of mind of knowing that your order is completely risk-free. It's finally time to stop crushing your balls in uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectjean.nyc. And again, our listeners get 15% off their first order and free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code WRESTLE15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with the promo code WRESTLE15. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Fuck your khakis. Get the perfect jean. Hey, so let's talk about, when we see that Hulk Hogan's turning heel, you find yourself on a loaded roster, and I'm wondering, are people talking about it that night? Like, I know in wrestling it becomes telephone, telegram, tele-wrestler. This is really pre-internet. I know some smart ass is going to say, no, it's not. Okay, well, people had bag phones and flip phones.
Right.
It's not like they could just scroll a social media app and see what's going on. Are you finding out, like, at the show or on the road on the way to the next town, wait a minute, Hulk Hogan's a bad guy?
Yeah, we're finding out shortly after. Guys weren't keeping up with it by the second. We were when we were running opposite shows. So, like, we were on a Monday night show and they're running a Monday night show. We would have, Howard Finkel be the one monitoring the show to let Vince know if anything big was happening so we could either counter it or move something inconsequential against it because they're going to beat us anyway. So we would change our live show. That's why I don't think there's ever going to be another time like this in television history. I mean, imagine Saturday Night Live going up against somebody else that has a comedy show that has all these great stars on it and changing their live show based upon what the other show is doing.
Yeah.
This will never happen again in history, what's going on. But as far as, we're on the road and house shows, no, we're finding out a day later. It didn't matter to us. Nothing we could do about it. I always thought the difference, Conrad, was the fact that our top guys were going to have incredible matches. I mean, we were going to have Stone Cold. You couldn't get him not to go under half an hour. I mean, and Taker, you couldn't get him going a half hour. Mick Foley, you couldn't get him to go crazy in house shows. You can tell him, Mick, you're going to destroy your body. Don't listen to house shows. Nah, fans are here to see me. And Foley would go out there and be Foley. He didn't care if there were 10 people there or 10,000. Foley was the same. Our matches were incredible. Our cards were incredible. We didn't have the drama. We didn't have Hogan. We didn't have Scott and Kevin. So it's not an either or, and I'm not making that case right now, but when people talk now about the difference between 5-star bangers and drama, which one draws money? You prefer to have both, but if you got to have either, take the drama. Because I'll tell you what, I've been there when we had the 5-star bangers. I'd watch them every night, and we were getting our ass whooped by those guys down south that had drama.
It is interesting too, because I don't think people always think about the consequences. Like, without the curtain call, well, I guess let's back up. Eric Bischoff signed Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. That creates the curtain call. The curtain call creates punishment for Triple H. That creates opportunity for Stone Cold to win King of the Ring. That creates an opportunity for him to say Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass. Like, all of that was a happy accident. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. It was supposed to be Triple H winning, which means we don't get Austin on that platform with Doc Hendricks. We don't hear Austin 3:16. Like, it's in a weird way, signing Scott Hall and Kevin Nash created Austin 3:16 and the Stone Cold run. People don't usually think about that, but that is the connective tissue between those things, right?
100%. And a lot of people don't realize this. I wrestled Jake Roberts earlier in that King of the Ring, and I lost to Jake. And if I hadn't lost to Jake, then Steve would not have cut the religious promos.
Yes.
And so I'm 100% responsible for Stone Cold Steve Austin and the whole Attitude Era, I would think.
Thank you. And we thank you for that. I mean, I think we should go ahead and just call it right now. Maybe we need some new merch. That JBL is the father of the Attitude Era.
Absolutely. And Stone Cold Steve Austin. Steve's always been a good friend. I think it's always because I was the one that, but without me, there is no Stone Cold. And if I beat Jake Roberts, he doesn't cut a religious promo on me. He cut a beard drinking promo on me. And there's no Austin 3:16. So, yeah, I'm pretty much responsible for everything.
I have it on good authority, John, that every June 23rd, old Steve Williams, the real life Steve Austin, he checks the mail and there's a handwritten card in there that just says, "You're welcome, John."
There is. I got a whole stack of them. I got like 20 something years of cards stacked up like that.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Hey, so I get a card from Gerald Briscoe on Thanksgiving every year too.
You're going to have to think about that one, boys and girls. That
man hates Thanksgiving and Christopher Columbus.
If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Go click the subscribe button right now for Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. You can get it anywhere you enjoy podcasts. That's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, anywhere in between. Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw is where you can get a little more John in your life. Hey, you mentioned who you were wrestling that night at the King of the Ring, and Stone Cold didn't just wrestle you and Jake. He also wrestled Mark Mero. And Mark Mero is somebody we haven't spent a lot of time talking about in 1996, but man, I'll be honest, Mick Foley was pretty transparent with us that it hurt his feelings a little bit, and he took it personally, and it motivated him that Mark Mero came in with a bigger guaranteed money contract than he got. He got opportunity. And he wrestled with a chip on his shoulder because he didn't think that was fair. He thought he had proven himself more than Mark Mero did in professional wrestling. And that's really kind of hard to argue, I suppose. But I know that Stone Cold wrestled with a chip on his shoulder too. Mick and Austin had that in common. They felt like, hey, it's not cool that this guy's making more money than us. Now, they've both said since, hey, you know what? That wasn't really fair. We shouldn't have hated on Mark for that. He got a good deal. We should have had an issue with the office, not the talent. Do you remember there being discussion about the deal Mero was on? Because I can't imagine that you came in with the same kind of deal.
You think? I had the old contract, which people have mentioned so many times. You get guaranteed 10 bookings at $150 a booking a year. So I'm guaranteed $1,500, which, by the way, when I signed the deal, I had to go home. I'd been on Europe for almost 2 years. I've been 2 tours in Europe, even though I was home a little bit in between tours. And I come back home. My dad was a community banker. He's an ordained minister, but my dad went into banking in his life because my dad didn't have much money, and he didn't have money to go in the clergy. So he worked in banking. Then when he got retired from banking, went in the clergy later in life, and ended up, he passed away as a minister at a local little church. And so my dad's a community banker. He grew up in the Depression, and so he's big on money. So I had to go back home and sit with him. And so my dad said, "So how'd it go in Europe?" I said, "Great. I'm glad to be home. It's freaking cold up in northern Germany." And he goes, which did you sign with? I said I signed with Vince McMahon. And he said, "Oh, that's up north, right? With WWE and WWF then." I said, "Yeah." And I think I had told him that WCW had offered me something like, they'd thrown out a number like 75,000 or something. I don't think it was an official offer, but that's kind of what they said that was kind of expected, first year, guy coming in. So my dad says, "So, well, you got 75 on the table from WCW. What'd you get from WWE?" And I had to tell my dad I signed a contract for $1,500 a year. He just looked at it. He goes, shrewd. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a failure. I'm a freaking failure. So no, I didn't get the guarantee. Nobody got guaranteed contracts back then. Mero was the first. That came in. And by the way, that European tour, which was such a fun tour, that's where I got the name of the clothesline. I'd hit Mero with a clothesline. I come back and Stone Cold goes, "That's not a clothesline. That's a clothesline from hell." And so that's where I got the name. It was from Mark Mero and the clothesline from Stone Cold. Because back then, you needed somebody else to give you the name of your finish or your moves. Now it's changed. Everybody's coming up with, Bradshaw bombs, Bradshaw lariats, whatever you want to call it. They do it themselves. But business has changed. Back there, somebody else had to name it. And that's where I got the name, was because I'd hit Mero with a clothesline in a house show in Europe, and Steve saw it and named it the clothesline from hell. But yeah, we all knew Mark had the guaranteed contract, and there was a little animosity toward it. We're busting it. And again, we should have had zero animosity toward Mero. Zero. It's not his fault. He negotiated a good deal and got a good deal. It's not his fault. I'd have done the same thing. There wasn't the animosity toward Brett for whatever reason when Brett signed that, $20 million deal or whatever it was, or when Brett went down to WCW. Maybe because he was one of us, but maybe because Mero came in and we didn't know him. Maybe there was more animosity toward that. But there shouldn't have been. I agree with everything Mick Foley says, that there was animosity. There shouldn't have been, but yes, there was.
I want to talk to you a little bit about another thing you experienced even before Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leave. It's In Your House, Beware of Dog. It's Florence, South Carolina. Bruce and I have covered this in the archives, but I want to hear about it from your perspective. As a reminder to everyone listening, this is the pay-per-view where an incredible storm hit the market, Florence, South Carolina. The storm is so incredible that they lose power in the building. They actually have to turn on the emergency lighting, but there's no power. So we've got battery operated handheld camera lights. We've got emergency lights in the building. Howard Finkel can't use a microphone, so he's doing his ring announcing using a megaphone, like Jimmy Hart style. This is clearly less than ideal, but you've got a house that paid to see wrestling. They're going to send you out there to wrestle in the dark. You and Jake Roberts are going to be the first match out there. Like, what do you remember about the power's off, the power's on? Hey, we're live, pal, on pay-per-view. This has to be chaos, John.
Absolute chaos. Dude, we didn't have a backup generator. We didn't have nothing. We obviously the next pay-per-view we had all of that, but we didn't have any of it. Nothing like this had ever happened before. So there's a couple of different things during the outage. We're trying to figure out when we're going to be back on air. So they grabbed me and Jake, and me and Jake had been working on the loop some, and they grabbed me and Jake and said, "Go out there and guys, go until we tell you to go home." They said it could be 30 or 40 minutes. We don't know. So we get out there and, we don't know if we're going to be out there half an hour or we don't know what's going to happen. And so Jake is kind of working the crowd. He's so over, he's Jake Roberts, and he's working the crowd a little bit. And Tim White turns to me and they said, when we say go home, you have to go home immediately because we're coming back on air and we want to get our pay-per-view back in. So me and Jake are just filler. And so we get out there and Jake's working the crowd a little bit. Tim White comes to me and goes, "Kid, go home now." And so it was something, I don't know what it was, like duck closed on DDT or whatever it was. And we got the hell out of there. So the match was, I don't know what it was, 20, 30 seconds, something like that. We went home like that when we did. And then in the main event match, this is a great story. So in the main event match, and I don't know if this happened first or second. I can't remember if it happened first or second after this, but I get it mixed up. But Briscoe comes to us and gets a bunch of us. I think Goldust was one of them. I was one of them. Me and Goldust were always the ones that had to bury Undertaker or Mankind, whatever it was, in the freaking Buried Alive match as well. We were always like the extras guys who had to do the horrible stuff. So they get us. They said, go out there, and I think we're going to leave Steve laying or something. I can't remember, Steve or Savio laying, one of the two, so we don't spoil the finish for the match because they're going to do it on Monday Night Raw. So first of all, we run out of the curtain and run out of Gorilla, and the whole crowd sees all these guys coming out, bad guys coming out, heels coming out, and they all kind of pop. And Briscoe goes, "No, wait, come back. We got to do something." So we all run out there, about 4 or 5 or 6 of us, and Briscoe says, "Come back." Well, come back. And Briscoe says, no, we got to do this. So he goes, "Okay, go again." So now we go again. And I can't remember if we beat up Steve or beat up Savio. Probably Steve because we were heels, beat up the babyface. I think that's, maybe, I can't remember. We interrupted the match. But Mick Foley was underneath the ring, and Mick has the electricity go out. He thinks he's kicked the cable for the monitor. So Mick doesn't realize the electricity's out everywhere. So he's trying to put cables back together in the dark underneath the ring. He has no idea. And they forgot about Mick. So we go out there in this run-in, and they forget to go, somebody needs to go tell Mick that the pay-per-view is not running anymore. He's still under the ring.
My gosh. I had no idea. I know
they
that
point out this is a legendary story, and I was told it was true. I think it is. I'll find out soon because the internet will correct me. We had one time our satellite system was going down, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And they looked around. Finally, somebody said, "Let's just go look around the truck." And Vince is panicking. Kevin Dunn's panicking. Everybody's panicking. Big Show was sitting out on the back of the TV truck smoking a cigarette. That's when he was, at his biggest, and he was moving the satellite system.
My God.
Yeah, it was. We had some real fun. We were doing stuff without a safety net. Nowadays you have all kinds of backup and all kinds of stuff. We didn't have any of that. Then when that happens, Colin Ray sang the national anthem that show in the Carolinas.
Do you remember allegedly, and I don't even remember this, but allegedly Sean was not happy with the decision to have them wrestle that night where they're having power problems. They'd already made the decision they're going to run it back on Tuesday. You remember Sean being unhappy that he's going to wrestle the same opponent twice? I mean, it's not like there's a best practices manual for this thing. So I get everybody's just doing their best, but if you were Sean in that moment, would you have felt like, hey, we don't need to do this twice. We need to wait and do it the right way?
As compared to doing it when?
Well, I'm just saying, like, you know, they did the pay-per-view that night in the dark.
Yeah.
And then they did a make good pay-per-view on Tuesday. So they had Raw in between. So we're going to do this half-ass pay-per-view. Then we're going to go do Raw. And now we're going to do the pay-per-view again. So you're essentially going to see pretty much the exact same card. But now that means you're exposing your audience to the same match or the same matchup. I'm not saying they did the mechanics of the match identically, but you get where I'm going. They're seeing it twice. It feels like that's less than. I think Sean's right in that.
100% he's right in that. And I'll tell you what, even a worse of a Raw deal was Stone Cold and Savio. They're in a strap match. They beat the shit out of each other in the dark, then in the light, and in the dark again. I hated being – I was in a lot of strap matches with Savio, and he'd always tell me, he goes, hey, amigo, you know, they like when the, you know, hits the skin, you know, really loud. I go, yeah, you're wearing a jersey. I'm the one out here half naked, okay? So it's not like, the fans really like it. You really like it, you sadistic bastard.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about Jim Cornette. This is the era where Jim Cornette is a big part of WWE programming. He's going to be joining Creative after Smoky Mountain Wrestling folds. And he is on air, but he's really active behind the scenes. What was your experience like working with Jim Cornette? I realize he's more controversial in 2025, but man, what a mind for the business.
Oh my God, I love Jim Cornette. I absolutely love Jim Cornette. I love talking to him. I love talking to him about his business. I've never seen guys go on rants that are coherent like Jim Cornette. You know, Jim goes on this long rant and this crazy rant, and somehow he wraps it all up and it makes sense. And you're like, God, I can't do that. That's really something. I saw in one of the newsletters some information you sent that I was supposed to go to Smoky Mountain, which was not true. I talked to Jim about coming in at some point, but by the time I came into WWE, it was already gone. So I would love to have worked for Jim. I really like Jim, and I liked when he was with Jarrett. They brought the NWA back for a little bit with Ricky and Robert. Jim was, he was very well liked. You know, people back then liked him. I don't know. You know, people now have some issues, I guess, with him. And he said, I don't have no idea. All I can tell you is from my personal experience and what I saw back then, people like Jim very much, and I love Jim Cornette.
I mean, I do think by and large he's liked more than he's hated. Like, and even some of the people I know who say they hate him, they listen to his podcast. So it's like, how much do you really hate him? You know, it's the old Howard Stern. You're listening because you love me, or you're listening because you hate me. Well, you're just listening. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Let's talk about ECW. We've recently, or very briefly, talked about, you know, your match where they got involved in September, just before the pay-per-view on the free-for-all. But what we didn't spend much time talking about is the next night on Raw, Taz from ECW tries to hijack the show. He's carrying a Sabu Fairs Taz sign, and you see that in the crowd, and they quickly cut to ad breaks. But it does feel like this is intentional. WWE is trying to work a little bit more with ECW. And we're seeing that now with them working with TNA. We're more out front about it. Back in this day, though, I mean, ECW had sort of made their name for themselves, poking at the big guys, whether it was Vince or it was Eric Bischoff. And now they're working with ECW. What do you think of that as a strategy for ECW and WWE in 96?
I think now it's different, the way they're working with TNA and NXT. I think now it's a good business decision. I think then it was desperation. I mean, you look at what Vince was trying back then. I mean, Vince brought Sid back. Vince brought Warrior back. Vince tried to work out a deal with ECW. He did these Billionaire Ted skits. I mean, we're getting our butts beat by WCW. And by the way, we're going out of business if this trajectory continues. So it's not like, you know, hey, we're getting beaten, but we're still a good company to be around for a while. No, we had a real fear, at least I did, of going completely out of business. And so I think this is desperation by Vince. Now, it's a smart desperation. just as the other stuff was. You bring Sid back, you bring Warrior back. I mean, those guys were massive draws, and you want to see if you can do something to stem this tide that's against us right now. I'm just getting stonewalled by freaking WCW and getting our ass kicked every single week. So a lot of this was simply Vince trying to find a way to make this work, which, by the way, during around this time, that's when Vince had the famous meeting with a lot of his executives, and Chris Chambers was the one that came up with the scratch logo for WWE. Chris, who ran the studios, who just retired, incredible person, an incredible talent.
Wait, Chris, Chambers retired? I didn't know that.
My understanding, yeah, I think he did.
Wow.
Yes, I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did.
Big news. That's
now, if he didn't retire, I've just announced it, and he's not. But I've heard from him, and I think he's. You know what? I think he is. I better put a caveat on that because I'm not 100% sure. I thought he had retired. Maybe he didn't. But Chris was the one that came up with the scratch logo. He wrote something down. He goes, "Hey, we need something edgy," and something that Vince goes, "Yeah, that's perfect." And Chris was the one who came up with it. So I say he's retired. You know, maybe he's not. If he's not, Chris is going to hate me. And Chris is a wonderful guy. He's an incredibly talented guy. He's one of the reasons for the success of WWE Studios and that whole complex at 120 North Hamilton.
I mean, really one of the unsung heroes of WWE, which is why I did a double take when you said he retired. It was like, wait, he retired?
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Shit, I'm not there. I don't know.
I text with Chris, every once in a while. He's a super, super guy, but man, he was the brainchild behind so many things in WWE Studios, for so many shows, for so many different things that we did. I mean, Chris is a brilliant, brilliant individual who did incredible stuff. It was so fun going up to the studios back then. We had such a good time. Of course, they took care of us in a million different ways back then. Back then, you could go up, they had beer for you, they had all kinds of stuff. Of course, they did on Tonight Show too. But nowadays, it's completely changed. But it was fun going up there back then.
Well, it's fun feeling like you're a kid again too, and that's what Blue Chew can help you do. We want you to have better sex with Blue Chew. Blue Chew is the original brand offering chewable tablets. These erection-enhancing tablets help men achieve a stronger, harder, longer-lasting erection for sexual activities. I mean, here's the deal, especially on this show. We all know about clotheslines, but why throw a regular clothesline when you can throw a clothesline from hell? Why have an irregular erection when you can have an erection from hell? Blue Chew is putting its money where its mouth is and offering you a month free. The process is simple. Sign up to get your ding-dong real hard at BlueChew.com. Consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA. They're prepared and shipped directly to your door. You can take them anytime, day or night, so plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. And the best part is it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at BlueChew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try your first month of Blue Chew free. Just visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. Hey, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, just the perception of ECW. I know you said it was out of desperation that WWE was working with them, but I know that there is going to be some talent like our friend Al Snow who winds up going to ECW and sort of reinvents himself. The whole head thing caught on, the Job Squad thing came on, and then he came back. I know ECW had its place, but how was it perceived by modern standards? Would it be perceived today like a GCW of sorts, or is there another analogy that you would make for someone who wasn't there during that time to really understand what ECW was all about?
There's not a comparison today at all. I don't think. I mean, you saw it back in the day. Those guys were the unbelievably passionate fan base. They had incredible talent. They had great talent, and they had a great show. If the internet had been around like it is now, those guys would have made a fortune. They just were relying on terrestrial TV contracts, and because they were, everything they're doing was they're pirating music. They're doing crazy stuff. You could have got away with that on the internet. And these guys that were doing this incredible stuff, those guys would have made a fortune, and they'd have been around for quite a while. It's hard to explain ECW. When I went one night stand and I saw how passionate those fans were, man, I got it. I didn't get to watch it a lot. WWE tried to work out some type of a deal with them. And I say it was desperation. It was desperation on WWE's part, not because of ECW wasn't worthy. They were. I mean, there's nothing like them today at all. There people still to this day chant ECW in different places 20 years after that company has been out of business. I mean, it's a remarkable legacy from those guys.
Let's talk a little bit about Survivor Series. This is one of the more important shows of the year for all of 1996. WWE doing pay-per-view in Madison Square Garden, sort of the home away from home for WWE. And it's pretty notable, everything that happens on this show. We see the return of some Hall of Famers like Jimmy Superfly Snuka, one of the last major appearances by a big star like Yokozuna, and then a debut that, it's going to mean a whole lot in the future. Maybe we didn't know it at the time. JR was first on that bandwagon, though, talking about the blue chipper Rocky Maivia is going to make his debut at Survivor Series. We also see the return of The Undertaker, who comes down sort of reinvented from the ceiling, feeling a little bit like Dracula. We saw Bret Hart get back in the ring for the first time in a long time, his first match back against Steve Austin. They used the same finish he had for Roddy Piper at WrestleMania, and what an incredible match it was. But the main event is what I want to spend a little time talking about right now, because it's Shawn Michaels and Sid. Sid's going to become the world champion, but I don't think that was the original plan. Allegedly, this was supposed to be Vader's spot. Of course, it was Shawn and Vader at SummerSlam, and there was some sort of miscommunication in the course of the match. You can go watch it back and see Shawn just scream at Vader, "Move," like he had blown a spot or something. And allegedly, as the story goes, Shawn complained and threw the flag and said, "Vince, I don't want to work with this guy." And as the story goes, it was supposed to be SummerSlam and Survivor Series, and then the Royal Rumble, where Shawn would get the title back from Vader in Shawn's hometown, San Antonio, Texas. That doesn't happen. Sid gets the job here, and what a moment it was. It really became the highlight reel when Sid passed away last year. We all saw this entrance in the match with Shawn, and it was just an unbelievable performance. So once again, maybe we didn't think so at the time, but Shawn was right. Goodness gracious, what a performance by Sid. What do you remember the dust up in the locker room being? What were people in the locker room saying about Shawn seemingly having the power to push Vader out and bring Sid in?
Yeah, I don't think that's that unusual. I mean, I don't think it's that unusual that a top guy has the ability to at least nix somebody, maybe not, change storylines completely. Shawn was different, and anybody who's a top guy like that, I think Bret Hart could have done the same thing. If Bret didn't like somebody, Bret could have got that changed. I think Undertaker could have got that changed. I don't think that's that unusual for a top guy to go, I just don't think I can have good matches with this guy. So I felt bad for Leon. Leon and I were good friends. Leon White, Vader's real name. Leon and I were good friends, and Leon was one of the best big men of all time. I mean, he was, the stuff he did, in Japan, the stuff he did with Sting in WCW. I mean, he was amazing. He was trained by the same guy that I was, Brad Rheingans, up in Minnesota. Brad, the 1980 Greco-Roman world champion, would have been gold medalist, but that's when Jimmy Carter boycotted the Olympics, one of the greatest Grecos of all time. Brad asked him when he first got up there, he goes, "Is there anything you could do?" And Leon was a first-round draft pick, played in the Super Bowl. Leon's a stud. And he said, "Anything outstanding you can do physically?" Leon got on his hands at 400-something pounds and walked around the dojo floor on his hands. I mean, he was a freak of nature. And I think a couple things happened. One, he got a little older. Two, people talk about the fight with Orndorff. I'm not sure if that was as big a deal as they've made it out to be. But also, physically, he had fallen apart. He had to get off the gas, and his shoulders killed him. Here's a guy who bench pressed about 600 pounds and, probably couldn't do much over 200 at the time because his shoulders were so bad. And I think a lot of that affected Leon physically, that he was not this mastodon like he was just a couple years before. And I think a lot of that came because Leon's self-image, I think, was hurt, which was hard to see for me because I realized what a great big man he was.
I for one, loved Vader in WCW. I was disappointed with the way his WWF run went, and I can't help but wonder, is that one of the greater what ifs in wrestling? Like,
Oh, is it ever?
Yeah,
Man, you bring in Vader a few years before, and you have Vader versus Bret Hart. My God, man! I mean, Bret and Steve had incredible matches. Bret and freaking Vader and Stone Cold, Vader and Shawn. Then, I mean, Vader. Oh my God, Vader and Taker. Then that was one of the biggest what ifs in wrestling history. A lot also what hurt Vader was you brought Warrior in around this time. I can't remember if it was right before or after. They just had Warrior squashing him during like the post-match live event. I mean, it just, you go 3 or 4 minutes. Warrior didn't want to wrestle, and he certainly didn't want to be out there with somebody big and stiff like Vader. And so you'd have Warrior. I remember one time he was on a crutch or something. He hit him with the left-handed clothesline, which looked terrible, and Vader did the job for him. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, man. This is, and I think a lot of that hurt Vader's image of himself, took away his self-confidence is what I'm trying to say. And I think a lot of that hurt. I don't know when it was when he had to call himself a fat piece of shit, but this was also during that time.
Yeah, not too far after this, 98. I do want to ask you, the reaction Sid got that night, did it catch you by surprise? I mean, I wondered, with the benefit of hindsight, was it backlash from the smart fans against Shawn? Were they just tired of the white meat baby face? Were they really into Sid? Is it a combination of all of it? I mean, I know that there's a lot of smart fans in the Northeast and a lot of fans in Philadelphia in particular. Man, they cheer the heels. What'd you make, and what do you think the boys made of Shawn's reaction and Sid's reaction that night?
I thought it was incredible. Look, what you want is a reaction. And I don't think anybody, and Sid was a freak of nature. I mean, Sid was, my God, man, that guy was unbelievable. If it hadn't been for softball, that guy might have had a hell of a career. He just didn't want to play he didn't want to play softball in the summer. But Sid, which was actually true, by the way, but Sid had that incredible body and incredible presence. I mean, Sid was not a great worker, but he's 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", whatever he is, 300 pounds with those freaking traps that look like coconuts on his shoulders. I mean, Sid had a look that nobody in the history of this business has had. I mean, it was ungodly seeing him in person and seeing him out there. He's so freaking big. When he walked out, arenas changed the whole mood changed when Sid walked out.
I want to ask you about Barry Windham too. I think this is Barry's first pay-per-view with the WWF in this era. I think we first started seeing the vignettes for this Stalker character in like August of 96, but he's on this pay-per-view and you're going to find yourself working with him as an opponent and then later as a tag team just a couple of months after this. What was your relationship like with Barry here at the end of 96?
Well, when I first came in, Chief pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we want you to work like Stan Hansen." I said, "Okay." So I'm told to work like Stan Hansen. Well, I know Stan well. I idolize Stan, so that was easy for me. Now I worked more. I'm copying more off Gordy and Wyndham than I did off Stan because I was around Gordy more. At least saw Gordy more from Texas. And so anyway, after about 2 or 3 months, they pull me aside and they tell me, and Chief's there. He says, "Hey, if we wanted to bring Stan Hansen in, we bring Stan Hansen in." And I didn't say a word because there are people there. I'm a stooge if I said something. You told me to work like this man. And now you're getting on me for working like him. So I'm sitting there like, you got to be kidding me. And I said, "Okay, well, how do you want me to work?" They said, "Work like a heel Barry Windham." I said, "Okay." 2 months later or 3 months later, they bring Barry Windham in. I'm like, I'm so confused at this point. And plus we're on the road, every day, which we weren't, in Europe or in the same place, it's just, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm getting eat up by this machine here. And then they bring Barry in and I love Barry. Barry is a dear friend of mine. Gary Hart had said when he's doing commentary in Texas, that I was Barry Windham's cousin because, I'm from Sweetwater and Mulligan claimed he was from Sweetwater. And I always wondered if I had heat with Barry, because I never said it. I never said that. I never let anybody say it. But I thought, man, I hope he doesn't think I'm trying to make a name off him. Gary Hart had said this and a lot of people had repeated it. Barry had never heard it. He didn't care. He's just the nicest guy in the world. Barry, if he hadn't got hurt, would have been NWA champion forever.
No doubt.
that guy was different level, man. He was so freaking good and so smooth. You know, the only person you can compare him to since 30 years since is Randy Orton. I mean, he was so good. I remember one time in Kansas City, we're working with Furnace and LaFawn, I think it was, and Barry got a huge pop there because he was really over there, you know, back in the NWA days. And all of a sudden, Barry turned the clock back, man, about 10 years. And I'm sitting there watching going, man, this is freaking amazing. This guy is freaking awesome. I really enjoyed meeting Barry, and I really enjoyed getting to work with him. And it was a huge honor to tag with him.
Whose idea was that, putting you guys together, calling you the Blackjacks and the whole outfit and the whole deal?
I think Vince, because he had such a good association with Jack Lanza. And, you know, he thought the world of Jack, you know, as everybody did. I mean, Jack was the guy. And so I remember when they pitched it to me, I went to Jack because Jack and I were very good friends. And I said, hey, listen, I just want to make sure you're okay with this. And he goes, kid, I'm honored. I'm actually honored that you're going to do it. I'm going to do some vignettes for you. I'm not going to be your manager. He said, they've asked me to do that. He said, but I don't want to be on TV. He said, I'm done with that. I just want to be an agent, you know, get done and go have fun. So, but the only thing I was concerned about was Jack Lanza's response. But when he said he was in favor of it, then I was very excited about it. But that was from Vince McMahon.
I got to tell you, you guys as the Blackjacks was one of my guilty pleasures at the time. I forget exactly what video game had come out. Maybe it was Power Pro Wrestling. I don't remember. But there was some video game that had come out where you could like create wrestlers, like create a wrestler deal. I created the Blackjacks. I thought it was a cool look. I thought it was a badass tag team. It felt like a throwback, like in a different time and place. Man, the new Blackjacks would have just ran a roughshod through Japan, would they not?
Oh my God, yeah. And that was the idea of going to Japan, you know, right after the Montreal Screw job was I wanted to get a job in Japan, and Barry was going to be the liaison, which Jim Ross was trying to set up between All Japan and WWE. We didn't realize that Laurinaitis kind of already had that job in the office with Baba. We didn't know the dynamics of the inner workings there. And so Barry didn't have a chance for it because Johnny had already basically filled that role. He wanted that role, and he had a much better relationship with the All Japan leadership. But my idea was to get a job there. And you know, the world changed after the Montreal Screw job. All of a sudden now guaranteed contracts. I never had a guaranteed contract. I had that $1,500 a year contract my dad was so proud of. And all of a sudden now when I get back from Japan, I'm offered a contract from JR. And you know, they just didn't want to lose guys. I don't think Justin Hawk Bradshaw made much difference, but you know, they were signing everybody. They just didn't want to lose any talent. And so the world changed. That's why I ended up staying with WWE. My whole thought was to go to Japan and get a job and stay there. That's why we went for the tag team tournament. Barry's the one, people have wondered, Barry's the one that booked all that. Barry had a great relationship with everybody in Japan. He was such a legend over there. And Barry's the one that booked all of that.
Let's talk a little bit about Shotgun Saturday Night. I have to admit, I wasn't reading the newsletters at the time, so I missed this. But in research for this episode, I realized that, hey, Vince was trying to do Saturday night pay-per-views, like weekly adult-oriented Saturday night pay-per-views, and the pay-per-view companies don't go for it, which I find interesting because we know that of several years after this, Jeff is going to go pitch them on doing weekly Wednesday pay-per-views, and they bite. Well, when Vince is told no about these Saturday night adult-oriented pay-per-views, he creates Shotgun Saturday Night, which at least at first was supposed to be a totally different show than what we wound up getting. We were going to be in these nightclubs, and it was going to be in a New York City nightclub, and it was going to be street and underground and shot guerrilla style, and it had a harder edge than what you would see on traditional WWE programming, and I dug it. But it doesn't last long that way. What did you think of the Shotgun Saturday Night idea? And do you think weekly adult-oriented Saturday night wrestling pay-per-views could have worked in 96?
Maybe. You know, the problem was we had a weekly adult-oriented show on Monday Night Raw. So, yeah. You know, it's not like today, you know, where, I mean, we had, good grief, we had nudity. We had people flipping people off. We had people using every language you could possibly use on Monday Night Raw. So it wasn't like Monday Night Raw was much of a departure from an adult-oriented pay-per-view.
Well, you weren't really there yet at the end of 96. You do get there in 7. But you're not quite there yet. But I can't help but wonder, what if he would have tried it and that worked? Could that have become the new normal? I mean, Vince has always sort of been the pioneer. And I know that when TNA was first launched just a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you saw this, it resurfaced a clip of him appearing on Bite This sort of poking holes in the TNA business model of, I don't understand. How are they going to promote the pay-per-views? He himself was trying to do weekly pay-per-views. Now, granted, he did have television, but just the idea that Vince wasn't opposed to the idea in 96. And I guess this is important. Context is king. He's getting his ass kicked in the traditional game now by WCW at that point. So I guess necessity truly is the mother of invention, right, John?
Yeah, and bring up two things to bring up, what Vince tries: the World Bodybuilding Federation and IcoPro. Vince tried a lot of things, and Vince has the most unique ability out of CEOs that I've talked with. They don't have their ego in the project; they have their ego in the company. And so when Vince saw something wasn't working, he really, his favorite phrase is day one thinking. What would you do today? Would you continue this project, or would you scuttle it? And Vince, a lot of CEOs wouldn't do that. A lot of CEOs said, I put my name on this. I'm gonna force this to work. Vince was like, okay, fine, it doesn't work. We'll go do something else. That's why he didn't have mind pulling the plug on the XFL and the things that he tried. He tried a lot of things. Most of them were successful. The few that weren't were crash and burns, and Vince moved on literally the next second. So, Vince had a bunch of ideas, and this was one of them. I think this one had a short shelf life, because I think you can only have, I think your adult audience is so limiting that, you saw what happened with now with WWE. It's gone to a much more tame product. And now when you do something out of the ordinary, it seems crazy and wild. But if you make that ordinary crazy and wild, I don't think it's very sustainable.
Well, what we know is not sustainable is the company at this point. We know that Brett is here. He signed what feels like a lifelong contract. It's a 20-year deal, 3 more years as a wrestler, 7 years as like a commissioner and on-air type, and then the rest as just the Babe Ruth of WWF, an ambassador role. Well, that doesn't last, and the NWO continues to kick ass. I do want to ask you, as we're putting a button on 1996 here, you started out at the very beginning of the year making your debut on Superstars, and you mentioned looking around at some of the houses and seeing what's going on as Razor is heading down south, and now Kevin Nash is following, and Hulk Hogan's turning heel. At the end of 96, man, WCW's on fire. They had an incredible Halloween Havoc pay-per-view with the debut of Roddy Piper, and now they're at Starrcade. They're in Nashville. It's sold out. They've got an undercard with guys like Jushin Liger and Rey Mysterio and Ultimo Dragon, and they've got a main event scene with Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper. And oh yeah, the Outsiders and the NWO are still the tag champs and running roughshod. Are you thinking at the end of 1996, I may have made a mistake? I should have tried to figure out a way to get to Atlanta.
Yeah, Brett's contract, I guess, was the Otani before Otani. He had that long tail on his contract, and and then right away Vince wanted to do something different. But we didn't have the money. We're getting killed, and I started thinking that we're in a lot of trouble here. Lanza was the one that really assuaged any of my concern, and when he told me, he said, "As long as that guy's in that chair, we're fine." And I had a hard time believing that at times, because they're killing us, man. I mean, and when they brought in Liger and they brought in all the cruiserweights and the people that followed with that, all of a sudden now they're having great matches. They're having these fun. I mean, talk about Penta coming in now for WWE. I mean, Liger going in for WCW, that was huge then. Just like Penta coming in now. I mean, it doesn't matter where they're from, their ethnicity. They're just massive stars. You don't see anybody like Liger. You don't see anybody like Penta. And they're killing us. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know. I'm not sure I chose the right horse of this. That's why I wanted to go to Japan, because I'm still under the same contract. My contract's coming up, at the end of 97, I guess. And so I'm thinking, I got 1 year left. There's no way I'll be here after this. They're not going to keep me. They're not using me that well. And they're trying to find something that works. Now, when Steve said Austin 316, that was our ray of hope. We knew right away that was huge. I mean, huge. The next night, you're starting to see Austin 316 signs, and Steve, they didn't capitalize on it right away because they didn't know what was going to happen. This just ended up in their lap. And at first, Vince, story goes, he didn't really like it. He thought it, could be considered blasphemous by the religious right. Steve's like, no, it's like the fisherman's Bible. It's the Bible according to Stone Cold. Vince got it. And then all of a sudden you see all the crowds start with Austin 316 signs. And you're starting to see our crowd start picking up. And that's when we started thinking we might have a chance here. But still, we're getting killed. And they're hitting on every correct cylinder down there. It was worrisome.
Well, don't worry. 1997 is coming right on time, and the company is going to shift gears. Lindsay's with us live as a member of our live studio audience from adfreeshows.com, and she says, Conrad and I share the fact that 1997 is our favorite year in wrestling as fans. Looking back as a fan now, what do you think was your favorite year to watch wrestling? Of course, 1997 is on deck for us next time, John, but that's Lindsay and I's favorite year. Do you have a favorite year to go back and watch?
Yeah, during the Attitude Era, and I don't know if it's 98 or 99, when Ron and I finally got together, they weren't doing much with me and Barry, and, unfortunately the tag dissolved and they put me with Ron. But during that time, all of a sudden, all of my friends become huge stars. And I mean huge stars. We knew Road Dogg was one of the most entertaining guys in the world. Brad, his brother, was as well. But Road Dogg, he figured out how to get him on television, being Road Dogg. That first time he walked out with Billy, he goes, hey, back off of CC, Billy, and just cut this stupid little promo going down the ramp. Place went crazy. All of a sudden, what we saw with Road Dogg, the fans saw. And all of a sudden, you're seeing with Billy Gunn. And then you got Kane, becomes Kane from this horrible copy of Kevin and this evil dentist. And so you're seeing Steve. Steve, the boys love Steve. When Steve got hot, it wasn't like there was animosity. And Steve and Brett are having these freaking classic matches. You talk about great matches, some of the greatest of all time. And we're sitting there watching this, and I'm thinking, man, these are my buddies. We're getting our ass kicked, and all of a sudden these guys have all become stars. And it's so fun. And I'm out there with Ron Simmons. I'm getting to ride with Godfather, and he's becoming this star with, all of a sudden the nation gets hot. That time was so fun to be there because we went through the desert before we made it to the promised land. We're out there starving our ass off in the middle of a desert. Nobody's over. Great stars. And all of a sudden, 2 years later, everything's happening and we're making a fortune, because Steve got hot. And so it was an incredible time, especially having from where I came from. I remember Michael Jordan. I love bringing up Jordan because I'm a big fan of Jordan. And he got mad at some guys that weren't there in the first 3 years of the run when they had the first three-peat. He took some time off when his father got killed and played a little baseball and came back for another three-peat. He thought the guys that weren't there in their first three-peat needed to learn a little bit of humility, that they need to learn a little bit about where they came from because he had to come through that. We had to come through that. And all of a sudden now we're in this three-peat era and everything's hitting on all cylinders, and now we're making money that we never dreamed of. It was an incredible time.
I can't wait for us to talk about 1997 next time here on the program. If you've got a question for John and I, it's easy to join the conversation. Find us on social media. We're at Prichard Show. Anywhere you enjoy your tweets. Of course, we're Something to Wrestle over on Facebook. We're Something to Wrestle on Instagram. And you can always check and see if you're blocked. There's about 87,000 people who've been blocked to hell and back by John Layfield. Seriously, you could sell. There will be more people in his blocked column than there will be in the stadium at WrestleMania. No fooling. But it's at JC Layfield on Twitter or John Bradshaw Layfield over on Instagram. And don't forget tonight, watch Raw on Netflix. Our man is going to be there. Bruce will be in Gorilla. And I think, John, you're going to be in front of the cameras. This will be the first time you've been on camera for WWE since when?
Oh, wow. I don't know. It's been a long time. It's been 6 months to a year, I would think at least. I haven't done anything in forever. So I don't know. It's been a really long time. I was happy that they called and was very transparent with everything that I was doing, and they were fine with that. And so I'm excited to go back.
I can't wait to see you back. Be sure to catch John tonight live on Netflix, and stick tuned. We're going to be back next week. I guess we can spill the beans. Bruce is back in WWE, but as I ran through at the beginning of the show, man, their travel schedule is crazy. The build up to WrestleMania this year is going to be busier than ever. And if you're a longtime Something to Wrestle with listener, you know that occasionally Bruce would miss shows and we spin up and get best ofs. John and I are going to keep the band together here through WrestleMania. So come WrestleMania time, maybe we'll have some new exciting announcements, but Brother Love is coming back. Bruce Prichard will be returning to Something to Wrestle. But I like that we've got the consistency and you and I get to have some fun and tell some stories until then. John, this will be a blast.
Hey, it's been so much fun. You know, I was very nervous when Bruce first called me and said, "Hey, would you fill in for me?" I said, "Well, for one, Bruce, I'll get you canceled and I'll ruin your entire podcast and nobody will want to listen and everybody hates me." And he said, "No, give it a try." But it's been so much fun. And I've loved working with you, Conrad. You are just the perfect host. It's so fun. It's so fun to sit here and, you know, somebody always that you don't have to pull teeth. You know, sometimes when you're working with somebody, it's tough, but you've always got a question. It's always fun. And of course, Dave Silva's behind the scenes, and he understands that Oklahoma is the worst place in the history of the world.
It is. It sucks.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
That's how Texas stays there. Hey, so if you haven't already, if you just can't get enough John, we want you to go hit the subscribe button on his regular programming. By the way, yes, you can go to somethingtowrestle.com and hit that subscribe button. Be here with us. We are going to be going live on YouTube. So when you go hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell. John and I are going to start reacting a little bit here and there to some breaking news when we can. And when he can get to his desk and I can get to mine, we'll be live. We want to hear from you. We want to interact from you. If you want to bust JBL's balls, here's your chance. It's somethingtowrestle.com. And if you just can't get enough John, and Lord knows I've had a lot of fun with him, I want to remind you, he's got another fabulous podcast and has for years with a true legend and Hall of Famer in the entire wrestling industry. Of course, we're talking about Mr. Jerry Briscoe. He's got stories for days. We're talking legendary stories from decades in the wrestling business. And they've really talking to a who's who. And now they're starting to branch out a little bit. So if you want some wacky, zany stuff, I can't believe this is a real sentence I heard before we clicked record. You know, the Blue Meanie's a UFO expert. You never know what they're doing over there, but it's a lot of fun. Go check it out. It's Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. Anywhere you enjoy podcasts, that's on Spotify, that's on YouTube, that's on Apple Podcasts. And don't worry, we'll be back next week talking all things 1997 right here on Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.